So who was the biggest spender of 2006? Actually, a candidate whose Senate seat was apparently never in any danger. According to the reporting of the New York Times, the Federal Election Commission records show that Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton of New York spent close to $30 million through the middle of October. The bulk of that paid for TV ads, but bills for catering, flowers, and photography reportedly put her over the top. $30 million. And part of that may in fact sway the elections in mid-state and upstate New York, which could add to what the pundits are saying may be a Democratic sweep or something near it in the House of Representatives. If someone tells you that, that person doesn't know. None of us does, because you haven't decided. But our You Decide coverage has begun in earnest, and it continues with the best team in politics. I'll see you late night tonight. Now, here's the big shot.
Next on Special Report, voters stream to their polling places to decide the most expensive and highly contested midterm elections in history. With all independent forecasters predicting a Democratic takeover of the House and quite possibly the Senate as well, Republican hopes hinge on a massive turnout effort and a trend in some late polls in their direction. We'll get an early take from the exit polling, and we'll check in with our correspondents covering both House and Senate to find out what they're hearing. All that, plus Michael Barone and our famous panel coming up right now. Page A1, please. News election headquarters at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Polls are still open here in the East and across the country. We do have some information from exit polls about whether the much talked about late momentum for the Republicans reflects reality, and a snapshot, more importantly, of how voters feel about key issues. I'm joined now by my colleague Chris Wallace with an update. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Brett. We'll be sifting through those exit polls all night. Interviews with some 12,000 people across the nation as they leave the voting booths. All the polls have not yet closed in any state, and we should tell you right up front, deja vu all over again, that the National Election Poll reports some questions, as they put it, about the exit polls in 5 key states: Arizona, Maryland, Ohio, Rhode Island, and Virginia. We're going to give you what we know, but you should take it with a grain of salt. We do have some national numbers now on several of the key issues tonight, and let's put them up. First, we asked how people feel about President Bush's job performance. 41% approve, while 58% disapprove. That's in line with the latest national polls just before the election. Interestingly enough, by way of comparison, approval of Bill Clinton was at 44% during the big Republican sweep in 1994, when they picked up 52 House seats. Turning to Iraq, 37% of voters say the war in Iraq was extremely important to their vote for Congress today. Of those, 61% voted for the Democrat, 37% for the Republican. But, and this is even more of a surprise, more voters, more than on Iraq, 42% said corruption and scandal in government was extremely important to their vote today. And they broke just as strongly for the Democrats, 61% to 36%. Now, one of the big questions in this campaign is whether it turns out to be a referendum on national issues or hundreds of separate races on local issues. 33% of voters tell us local matters counted most, while 62% focused on national affairs. And was there any late momentum in the final days of this campaign? Well, 18% of voters, about 1 in 5, tell us they made up their minds over the final weekend. Of those late deciders, 57% went Democratic, while 39% voted Republican. We'll have key numbers all night about issues as well as breakdowns by age, race, and religion of how voters split today. And if the national exit poll is not enough, Fox News has been conducting its own exclusive telephone polls with 900 voters and likely voters in 7 key states where there are 11 hotly contested House races. We can tell you that as of now, according to our Fox News phone poll, in 6 of those 11 races, Democratic challengers appear in strong position. They're leading by at least 5 points, while Republican incumbents seem to be holding on in 3 districts. Now, coming up at 7 p.m., we'll have exit polls from Virginia's key Senate race between George Allen and Jeb Webb, and we'll also have numbers on a hotly contested Virginia congressional race, another indication of how the battle for the House is going. As the evening heats up, we'll be able to tell you why your candidate won or lost, and why the battle for control of Congress turned out the way it did. Brett?
Okay, Chris, we'll be checking with you regularly. Thank you. It has been the conventional wisdom for the past couple of weeks that Democrats could take control of the Senate, but not easily. A great deal will depend on how well each party gets out its base of support. Chief Political Correspondent Carl Cameron is standing by in our Washington Bureau with a look at where the Senate races stand at this hour. Carl?
And we'll be monitoring them minute to minute as we go through the night, Britt. In the 7 to 9 states that may determine the Senate majority, both parties are reporting strong turnout. One Republican did say today, though, that if this is a referendum on the president, it could be a GOP bloodbath. But if each race turns on the differences between the Republican and Democratic candidates, Republicans will run strong.
Democrats need 6 pickups for control, and both parties expect in Ohio, incumbent Republican Senator Mike DeWine will come up short against Democrat Sherrod Brown. And in Pennsylvania, incumbent Republican Rick Santorum will be unable to catch up to Democrat Bob Casey Jr. Democrats need to knock off 4 more. They're highly confident in Montana. Despite a last-minute surge by incumbent Republican Senator Conrad Burns, who was tainted by the Abramoff scandal, Democrat John Tester may have an edge because of the Democratic Party's work with Native American voters and the state's early voting program. This could be a Democratic pickup. Republicans are nervous about Rhode Island, too. Lincoln Chafee has surged in the polls, but Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1. And Democrat Sheldon Whitehouse had the lead for the last few weeks. Turnout in Chafee's strongholds was high, but Republicans know Democrats may be on the verge of knocking off the Senate's most liberal Republicans.
Thank you very much.
Both parties think Tennessee may stay Republican. A ballot initiative on gay marriage may also draw conservative opponents to the polls who could boost GOP turnout for Republican Bob Corker. He focused the race on his Democratic opponent, Harold Ford Jr.'s character in the last few weeks and forced the Democrat to play defense. Corker appears to have surged ahead. The GOP is worried about Virginia. George Allen's turnout effort got a late start this summer because he was forced into damage control for various verbal gaffes.
Everybody vote!
Turnout is high across the Old Dominion, but it's unclear if Allen's ground game can match Democratic voter intensity and the anti-war sentiments that Democrat Jim Webb's campaign has generated. The last Republican-held toss-up is Missouri. The show-me state still shows a tie, and there have been some minor voting problems. Republican Jim Talent and Democrat Claire McCaskill have come down to the wire in a dead heat, and it's still there. Turnout in both Republican and Democratic strongholds is described as heavy. Democrats face challenges in 2 states. New Jersey, where Democratic incumbent Bob Menendez is expected to fend off Republican Tom Kean, and Maryland, where Republican Michael Steele would pull off the year's biggest upset if he beats Democrat Ben Cardin.
And across the country, there have been all sorts of allegations of intimidation and voter fraud, but most of it has been pretty small-time stuff. Lawyers are all dispatched getting ready for recounts already. Republicans say when they compare the turnout effort in the precincts that they've been watching versus 2004, they're actually ahead of the game in the last presidential election. Democrats counter that when they talk about the precincts that they're looking at, they've got an almost equal advantage, Brett.
All right, Carl, just what we expected. Thanks very much. Democrats, of course, are far more optimistic about their chances of assuming the majority in the House and in the Senate. And congressional correspondent Major Garrett is standing by in Washington with a look at where the House races stand right now. Major?
Well, Britt, the battle for the House could lead to a historic turnover of power from Republicans to Democrats. As Election Day draws to a close, Republicans fear this prospect in ways they haven't since they gained power in 1994. Conversely, Democrats anticipate regaining power really for the first time since having lost it back to Newt Gingrich in that '94 historic election. But before we put the campaign for the House to bed, it's worth noting some of the more memorable races around the country, none more curious than the battle in Florida's 16th congressional district.
No, I punched Foley for Joe.
Joe Negron, the substitute Republican candidate trying to hold the House seat Mark Foley resigned from in disgrace, but to do it he had to vote for Foley since his name couldn't be removed from the ballot. In southeastern Indiana, freshman Republican Mike Sodrill tried to defy the pundits and win a rematch against Democrat Barron Hill. Hill lost by less than 1,500 votes and believes he can turn the tables on Sodrill in this anti-GOP year. Many House races defined by unease over Iraq. In Illinois' 6th District, Peter Roskam is trying to hold a GOP seat against a strong challenge from disabled Iraq war veteran and Democrat Tammy Duckworth. Democrats need to capture 15 seats to regain control of the House, and all day they predicted that and many, many more.
There are probably 26 to 30 that the Democrats are now leading in going into today's election. So my number is anywhere from 25 to 40 seats.
I think we could win as many as 30-plus seats gain in the House of Representatives.
One reason for Democratic confidence, the turnout the vote effort led by Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton's bid for re-election.
Well, I voted for change, except for me.
Top Democrats say Clinton's efforts in New York could lead Democrats to taking these 5 House Republican seats. Republicans won't concede that much terrain, but confirm big problems in turning out their vote and don't rule out losing all 5 seats. Republicans know they are playing defense nationwide. Another vulnerable seat, Clay Shaw's in southeastern Florida, but the party won't play numbers games.
I think we're going to lose some seats in the House after gaining seats for 3 elections straight, but I don't think we're going to lose the majority in the House.
And while Republicans express some concern about turnout in House races, they expect it to be offset by higher than expected absentee voting.
The two parties are pretty close when it comes to turnout. It also shows, as I said, big advantages for Republican with absentee and early votes. So my general belief is to everybody involved, grab a cold one, grab some pretzels. It's going to be a long night.
Britt, that's the public expression of Republican officials, but behind the scenes there is real Republican anxiety. I can tell you the rumors are flying around Capitol Hill fast and furious. There's one rumor that Speaker Hastert's office has already warned House Republican offices to expect losses of up to 30 seats. The Speaker's office denies that and will not comment on whether Speaker Hastert, if in fact Republicans lose control of the House, will seek a position as minority leader. There are already other Republicans, Mike Pence of Indiana, who are very seriously thinking about running for that position if Republicans are blown out tonight and find themselves in minority status for the first time since 1994. Back to you in New York, Britt.
Okay, Major, thank you. Next on Special Report, President Bush urges Americans votes and urges Americans of all ages to do the same, except those who can't vote, of course. And he says he hopes for a Congress he can work with. That report coming up next. President Bush, as much as anyone in the country, has to be hoping for a House and Senate that will support his agenda in the last 2 years of his administration. After voting in Texas this morning, the president is back at the White House. And that's where our chief White House correspondent, Brett Baer, is standing by. Hi, Brett.
Hi, Britt. Tonight, the president is in the White House residence watching returns with the First Lady and his chief political advisor, Karl Rove. We're told we will not see any video or pictures of them, and the White House is not expected to put out any statements tonight. Now, after raising about $200 million for Republican candidates, the president's election day started with a vote in Texas. Heading into the Crawford Firehouse, the president's polling place, he was asked if he would vote a straight Republican ticket.
Pretty well made up my mind on what I'm going to do. Thanks for asking.
Afterwards, with an I voted sticker on his jacket, the president put aside his partisan jabs of recent days and urged all Americans to get to the polls.
No matter what your party affiliation or if you don't have a party affiliation, do your duty. Cast your ballot and let your voice be heard.
The president campaigned like he was on the ballot, racing through 15 cities in 11 days, wrapping up in Dallas Monday night.
We're closing strong because we're right on the issues.
The president's final 5 days on the trail showed stops in the reddest of red states to try to prevent a Democratic-controlled Congress. In Billings, Montana, for incumbent Senator Conrad Burns.
Democrats are going to tax whoever they can find. And we're not going to let them because we're going to put Conrad Burns back in the United States Senate.
In Elko, Nevada, for congressional candidate Dean Heller. 2 stops in Missouri trying to shore up incumbent Senator Jim Talent. The president repeatedly insisted his tax cuts have led to a strong and growing economy.
And this morning, we got more proof of that. The national unemployment rate has dropped to 4.4%.
In Lamars, Iowa, for trailing Republican gubernatorial candidate Jim Nussle. In Greenlee, Colorado, for Congresswoman Marilyn Musgrave. In Grand Island, Nebraska, for congressional candidate Adrian Smith. In Topeka, Kansas, for Congressman Jim Ryan in a tight race. In Pensacola, Florida, for gubernatorial candidate Charlie Crist, who chose to campaign elsewhere. In Bentonville, Arkansas, for gubernatorial candidate and former Undersecretary of Homeland Security Asa Hutchinson. And finally in Dallas, Texas, for Governor Rick Perry.
But I want you to know, for the next 2.25 years, I'm going to sprint as hard as I can to make this country as great as it can be.
From Texas, the president returned to the White House to watch returns that will determine how tough his sprint will be. Senior aides say the president will be making some phone calls to victorious Republicans tonight, but they also point out if it is a long night, President Bush is historically early to bed, and he may go to sleep before knowing definitively what Congress will look like for the next 2 years. Brett.
Well, Brett, thanks. We'll be up here, though. Next on Special Report, we'll look at what went right for the voters today and where there was trouble at the polls. That report when we return. By most accounts, most of today's voting has been trouble-free, but great numbers of voters are using new technology to cast their ballots. And though hanging chads may be a thing of the past, the course of true love and free elections ne'er run perfectly, at least not perfectly smoothly. Fox's Bill Hemmer joins me from Cleveland with a look at what went wrong and what went right. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Brett, good evening here from Cuyahoga County in Cleveland, Ohio. Ohio made history today. For the first time ever in a statewide election, everyone who went to the polling station today voted by way of machine. Now, it did not all go as planned throughout this entire election day today, an election that continues again for another hour and 10 minutes here in northern Ohio. However, Ohio voters are getting through it.
Americans moved their voting system to the 21st century today, many voting electronically for the first time.
Yes, it's all set up.
In 2002, federal law mandated a new election system. $3 billion, and now 4 years later, polling stations open with high-tech machines designed to streamline the process. From daybreak, it appeared some areas of the country would have a very long day. A computer glitch in Indiana kept people from voting in 75 precincts. Computer cards needed to activate machines were not properly programmed. Most issues appear to be operator error. A court order in Indianapolis is now keeping polling stations there open an additional 2 hours and 40 minutes tonight.
I think we need to allow every voter that might not have been able to vote this morning a chance to go back after work and give them plenty of time.
Similar problems were encountered from New England to Tennessee, and the Republican National Committee claiming voting machines in New Jersey were pre-programmed to cast extra ballots for Democratic Senate candidate Bob Menendez. Ensuring the security of electronic voting is one of the major concerns in the new system. But critics complain the 4 years mandated by Congress to implement e-voting was too much, too soon.
That's too short a period of time for those machines to actually be created, much less have the regulatory standards created and vetted by scientists, or the security apparatus created, or the staffing.
Earlier in the day, some precincts across Ohio did experience problems, but in a unique program here in Cleveland, a computer program designed to monitor each polling station was tracking any issues that needed attention.
And the head of Cuyahoga County Election Board today says they had a few glitches in the morning, but by late morning, mid-afternoon, everyone in every precinct, all 576 precincts here in the county, were voting electronically. He says no one was on a paper ballot. Britt?
Bill, thanks very much. Along with the congressional candidates, voters in 36 states are choosing governors as well. And here again, Democrats say they're very hopeful tonight they will prevail and gain a majority of those offices. Correspondent Megan Kendall reports on the gubernatorial contest. Megan?
Hey there, Brett. Well, it's been a dozen years since the Democrats controlled a majority of the nation's state houses, but that could change tonight. Right now, the Democrats control 22 of the nation's 50 governorships, Republicans the other 28. The Democrats need 4 to win a majority. Most pundits say they'll get that and more. 10 seats are open in this election, meaning a governor is stepping down. 9 of those are GOP held, and 5 are considered likely turnovers to the Democrats, including Colorado, Arkansas, Ohio, New York, and Massachusetts. Nevada also has an open seat. Republican Jim Gibbons had been dominating over Democrat Dina Titus, but the race tightened significantly after a cocktail waitress alleged that Gibbons groped her in a parking garage, charges Gibbons denies and which do not appear to be supported by the relevant garage security tapes. Pundits say the other 2 open Republican seats, Alaska and Idaho, could also wind up with Democrats, although that is far from clear. But they believe the GOP will retain its hold on the Florida State House, where Governor Jeb Bush is stepping down due to term limits. That's also a tight race. The one seat being vacated by a Democratic governor, Iowa, could wind up with the Republicans. The Democrat, Chet Culver, is polling ahead, but Republican Jim Nussle is keeping the race very close. As for sitting governors, a few may lose their jobs tonight. On the Republican side, at least 3 are in danger, including Bob Ehrlich of Maryland and Tim Pawlenty of Minnesota. Both are popular GOP governors, But they govern blue states and face very strong candidates. Rhode Island's Republican Governor Don Carcieri is also facing potential ouster. The Democrats, too, could lose a few incumbents. Most vulnerable, Ted Kalingoski in Oregon and Jim Doyle in Wisconsin. Both are leading their opponents, but by slim, single-digit margins. Viewers may wonder why they should care about the governorships. They are important for several reasons. First of all, the next president could come from the nation's state houses. 4 of the last 5 presidents have. But a governor can also affect who wins the presidency. Experts say a popular governor can move his state's vote as many as 3 percentage points in favor of a candidate. And let's not forget about redistricting, where a state's congressional district lines are redrawn by state lawmakers. It happened in Texas in 2003 and resulted in Republicans picking up 5 seats in the U.S. Congress. Those efforts have to be approved by the governor, and clearly it can tip the national balance of power. Just a few things to keep in mind as the results come in tonight. Britt.
Megan, thank you very much. We'll be back to you often tonight. Thanks again. Saddam Hussein's former vice president, Ibrahim al-Duri, reportedly has ordered Ba'ath Party bosses in Iraq to end insurgent attacks. The Associated Press says al-Duri, who has been hiding since Saddam's government fell, issued the call after Saddam was convicted of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death on Sunday. Al-Duri's reported directive also comes at a time when the Shiite-led Iraqi government has agreed to legislation that would reinstate former Ba'athist officials to some positions of responsibility. Saddam himself today, at his other trial for crimes against the Kurds, also called for reconciliation. After 47 votes at the United Nations, Venezuela's Hugo Chavez has been forced to give up his quest for an open, rotating seat on the United Nations Security Council. Chavez has said his efforts were an attempt to end U.S. domination of the world body, but the struggle ended today after both Venezuela and U.S.-backed Guatemala dropped out. The diplomats voted overwhelmingly then for Panama to fill the Latin American seat, and then burst into applause when the results were announced. We're going to take a break here to give our sponsors a little time to talk to you. When we come back, though, a last-minute campaign ad in Georgia opens old wounds and stirs up old fears. Well, you hear this. That story is next on The Grapevine. And now the most absorbing 2 minutes in television, the latest from the political grapevine. A radio ad for the chairman of the Fulton County Commission in Atlanta is using some heavy hitters to warn of dire consequences as Republican Lee Morris defeats Democrat John Eves. Georgia Congressman John Lewis says, quote, "You think fighting off dogs and water hoses in the 60s was bad?" Former Atlanta mayor and UN Ambassador Andrew Young says Republicans would, quote, "turn back the clock on equal rights." And the current Atlanta mayor, Shirley Franklin, says the work of Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders would be lost. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which has a reputation as pro-Democrat and left-leaning, has endorsed the Republican Morris, saying his political and professional experience give him the edge over Democrat Eves. Illinois Democratic Senator Barack Obama, who is African-American, of course, last week campaigned for Maryland Senate candidate Ben Cardin, who is white. Obama urged voters not to let race lead them to cast ballots for Cardin's African-American opponent, Republican Michael Steele. Said Obama, quote, "You don't vote for somebody because of what they look like." But on Sunday, Obama campaigned for Tennessee Senate candidate Harold Ford Jr., who is black. Obama urged congregations at 2 black churches to vote for Ford, saying, quote, "I'm feeling lonely in Washington." South Carolina Republican Governor Mark Sanford was able to see well enough to get to the polls today, but he couldn't get in. Sanford, who is running for a second term, burned his eyes under bright stage lights on Sunday. Today, he forgot his voter registration card and was turned away at his polling place. He later came back and voted. And 6th-term Ohio Republican Congressman Steve Chabot found out how seriously poll workers are taking the state's new voter ID law. When he had his driver's license rejected as ID because it had his business address on it, so Chabot went home and came back with a bank statement and a Social Security statement and was allowed to vote. Said as sheepish Chabot, "I guess this just shows the poll workers are really doing their job," end quote. And Richard Armitage, the man who leaked Valerie Plame's CIA status to the press and then let others take the blame for it in the press, is now saying that Democrats will win the House and perhaps the Senate, and he says approvingly, this will mean increased oversight of the Bush administration. In a speech in Canberra, Australia, Armitage said, quote, "The message, I think, from the electorate is that fear doesn't work. You've got to go back to what is traditionally ours, to those things that made us important in the eyes of the world." And the former Deputy Secretary of State added that after 9/11, America was, quote, "exporting our anger and our fear," and that the U.S. needs to now export hope, opportunity, and inspiration. Richard Armitage. Beside the candidates for the House and Senate and local office, there are scores of ballot initiatives before voters today, and nearly a third of them were initiated by the voters themselves. Our chief Washington correspondent Jim Engel has a look at some of those questions.
Voters are not only choosing their policymakers today, in many states they'll have a chance to set policy themselves. 37 states have more than 200 initiatives on their ballots, and those that touch a nerve with voters can get them to the polls.
I think it can impact on turnout, and I think it gets the casual voters out who might not be inclined to vote in a federal election.
In 2004, pollsters believe a gay marriage issue on the ballot in Ohio helped win that state and get President Bush reelected by energizing conservative voters. There are 8 more ballot initiatives on gay marriage this year. Other social issues on the ballots include abortion. 2 states vote on whether parents must get 48 hours notice before their child can receive an abortion. In South Dakota, voters will decide whether to repeal a state law banning all abortions except those to save the life of a mother. Another hot-button issue is stem cell research, which is on the ballot in Missouri.
I care deeply about stem cell research. In Missouri, you can elect Claire McCaskill, who shares my hope for cures.
Her opponent, Senator Jim Talent, supports stem cell research, but not Amendment 2 to the state constitution, which would protect stem cell research from any limitations from the legislature. It would ban human cloning, but it enshrines in the Constitution the right to clone embryos for research, which some regard as creating life in order to destroy it.
Amendment 2 claims it bans human cloning, but in the 2,000 words you won't read, it makes cloning a constitutional right. Don't be deceived.
There are also 12 states that will vote on whether to restrict eminent domain after the Supreme Court upheld the right of New London, Connecticut to take over an individual's property for development in what is known as the Kelo case.
Important to a lot of people where they looked at that Kelo case and said, wait, you can take my house away from me? Yeah, I'm going to go vote for that.
5 states will also vote on whether to increase the minimum wage, and many will vote on higher taxes on tobacco with the proceeds to go into health care programs. And one totally unique issue in Arizona that would establish a $1 million prize to be given to a randomly selected voter from either the primary or the general election. So if civic duty or special ballot initiatives don't motivate you to vote, perhaps a turnout lottery will. So all in all, Britt, even as voters choose local and national officials today, they've identified a few issues as too important to leave to politicians, and on those, voters will tell legislators exactly what to do. Britt?
Okay, Jim, thank you. If there is anyone who knows the polls and the precincts in America better than Fox News contributor Michael Barone, we haven't met that person. He knows the history of where Democrats and Republicans have been, and he's here tonight to read the tea leaves and tell us where they may be headed. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Britt. Well, tonight we're going to be looking at a lot of House races, and the question of House control is definitely up for grabs. And that we don't have exit polls in the polls, so one of the things I'm going to be looking at is the tabulated vote and finding out how these embattled Republicans are doing compared to what they've done in the past. 9th District of Indiana, for example. That's one of 3 races that are seriously contested seats in Indiana where the polls close at 7 p.m. That's southeastern Indiana. Freshman Congressman Mike Sodrell is going up against the man he beat barely 2 years ago, Democrat Barron Hill. That's a race that Democrats have been hoping all year to win. President Bush is in that district for Mike Sodrell. That's going to be a closely contested race, and we're going to try to look at that county by county, looking at the turnout, looking at the percentages for the candidates. Kentucky 4. Right across the river, northern Kentucky, the suburbs of Cincinnati. It extends west to the suburbs of Louisville and east to the industrial center of Ashland on the Ohio River. That's an area of mixed heritage, with some counties there have been Democratic since the Civil War. You've got Republican-leaning northern Kentucky. Republican candidate there, Jeff Davis, another freshman Republican. He's facing Ken Lucas, a former congressman, who in fact beat him 4 years ago in 2002. That's a compound of different kinds of areas, and we're going to be taking a look at how they're doing there. And then at 8 o'clock, Northeast Connecticut, the Connecticut 5th Congressional District. Here the embattled Republican is Nancy Johnson. She's been in the Congress for 24 years. She survived a tough challenge 10 years ago when there was a lot of backlash in the Northeast against Newt Gingrich. The campaign manager of her opponent of 10 years ago, Chris Murphy, now a state senator, is the Democrat running there. There have been a couple polls in the last 2 weeks of the campaign that have shown Chris Murphy ahead of Nancy Johnson. She's been running some tough commercials. A big question there, how's she going to do in the Farmington Valley? Those affluent suburban areas, Farmington, Simsbury, just west of the mountains, west of West Hartford. That's an area where she's voted strongly for her in the past, but at least in the sample of polls, one of those polls showed her trailing in the Farmington Valley. This would be bad news for Republicans and could cause her to lose her seat. So that's the kind of thing that we're going to be looking at in House races in the opening hours after the 7 and 8 p.m. polling close, and as the numbers come in during the day, or during the evening, I should say, and into the small hours of the night. Will Democrats be able to win those 15 seats that they need for a majority? Will they pile up a bigger majority than the 15 net gain that they're going to make? Those are questions we'll be examining district by district, county by county, and in New England city by town.
All right, Michael. Nobody does it better, as you've just shown. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you shortly. Next on Special Report, however, the Fox All-Stars will be here to talk about what the exit polls may be showing us so far, if anything. So stick around. We'll be right back.
The people in America want change. They're not happy with what's happening overseas in Iraq, in North Korea, in Afghanistan. They're not happy with what's happening at home as wages stay flat and the cost of tuition, prescription drugs, energy goes up, and they're demanding change.
Senator Schumer, who most observers think has done a very good job of running the Democrats' effort to regain control of the Senate, obviously believes that he is at least on the verge of doing that tonight, and he may well be right. This is the stage of the night when we who work at these news organizations that subscribe to the election night exit poll are able to begin to look at the results to see two things. One is why people say they voted as they did, and the other thing, of course, is the horse race questions, race by race, state by state, of how they voted. 2 years ago at this time, we were sitting here, and all of us believed we had understood from the exit polls that John Kerry had been elected President of the United States, and a number of other results that fell along those lines. Well, it turned out to be wrong, and it wasn't the first time. Now, 2 years later, we've been given to believe that the exit polling techniques, the oversampling of Democrats, the problems in the exit polls have been solved, it was hoped, and the new exit polls will be better. Well, they're out. We can't tell you about all of what's in them because polls are still open, but we have some thoughts here at this panel tonight about what the exit polls may or may not be able to tell us, and some thoughts on this from Bill Kristol, editor of the Weekly Standard, Fred Barnes, executive editor of the Weekly Standard, Mort Kondracki, executive editor of Roll Call, and my friend Juan Williams, senior correspondent of National Public Radio. All are Fox News contributors. Well, we have some exit poll data. We also have data from a Fox News Election Day poll, which is an ordinary garden variety telephone poll conducted the same as every pre-election day poll. So based on what first of all, how far do you think we can go in making any conclusions based on what we've seen so far of the exit poll numbers? Fred?
Well, I think we can conclude what we thought ahead of time, and that was it's going to be a good Democratic night. I think we conclude, though again, this exit poll is way out of whack. You know, races that were close shows one of the candidates, usually a Democrat, winning by 15 points, 20 points, when we know that's not true. The telephone poll is actually better. I think there are a couple other things that we can tell.
I mean, the Fox telephone poll.
It seems to be better. It's closer.
Does anybody disagree with this? Fred's thoughts about that a lot of these early numbers are out of whack?
Yeah, it depends on how it's weighted.
And we don't know.
I know, but weighting means that means when you adjust the results because you think your poll is wrong, right?
We don't know what the bias is and how much of a Democratic bias it is, but still, when you put it together with the phone poll, you think it's going to be a pretty good night. And one other thing,
of course, it being a pretty good, it was always going to be a good night for.
Yeah, it was always going to be a good night. You know, probably win the House and do pretty well in the Senate. The other thing is, that interested me was in the, which I don't know how this could get particularly slanted, but maybe it could, and that is how late deciders went. And they went sort of 3-2 for the Democratic candidates, which would lead one to believe that this rally of Republicans at the end that we certainly talked about for the last couple days.
And which some polls showed.
Well, no, yeah, more
several
than one.
polls showed.
3 or 4 polls showed.
Yeah, look at this. It says late deciders went almost 60-40 for the Democrats.
That we thought it was late deciders going for Republicans. As it turned out, maybe not.
Are you skeptical of that number?
Not as much as I am skeptical of the others.
All right.
I mean, we won't know, of course, which polls are out of whack until we see the final results.
Right.
It does seem that the exit polls skew Democratic. They did in 2004. They've done in prior races, actually.
In 2002, they did too.
And in 1992, I was on Air Force Two with Vice President Quayle, and the first wave of exit polls were Clinton defeating Bush by 12 or 13 points. He won by 5 points. So they can be off 6 or 7 points. I guess Republicans walk out of the polls and they're surly people, you know, and they see some nice exit pollster, some young woman there, and they say, get lost, and the Democrat is so eager to share his views, you know. I don't know why it is. Republicans do seem to not like talking to exit pollsters quite as much as Democrats. I think that late decider number is consistent with the general sense that it's a Democratic year. People are unhappy with the president and with the war and with the Republican congressional leadership. You haven't been paying that much attention to politics. Probably if you're a late decider, you tune in late. You're likely to go. Right. That makes sense. 3-2 Democratic, I think.
What's your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, the usual break on late undecideds is 2-1. The
for
standard conventional wisdom, this is 1.5 to 1. That would be more or less in line. The other point, you know, the surprise in the poll what had to do with corruption being the most important issue.
More important than Iraq.
Yeah, more important than Iraq. Well, you know, remember,
you believe that?
Just a minute. 2 years ago, it was moral values. Do you remember that?
Right.
And then when in the light of day, we saw that moral values was outstripped completely by foreign policy issues when you added Iraq and terrorism.
Together, yeah.
Yes, we don't know what the terrorism number is today. I suspect the same thing will happen.
Juan, your thoughts?
I mean, let me just say for the Fox News decision desk that they think they've weighted the poll properly this time after 2 miscues, and that they think they've got it right. And if you look at
No, wait. Fox does not
As we noted earlier, a judge in Ohio has ordered that some of the polls out in that state be kept open longer than they had been scheduled to be. This, of course, a result apparently of some voting problems out there. But let's find out what it's really all about from my colleague Bill Hemmer, who is out in the state. Bill.
Hey, Brett, good evening. This is the press release the Democratic Party put out a short time ago, and this is what they are saying now that they took to a federal judge here in northern Ohio. This is Cuyahoga County only, which is where we are in Cleveland, Ohio here. 16 polling stations will stay open about another 90 minutes, which means 9 o'clock local time here in Cleveland. Now, in the county alone, Britt, there are 576 polling stations, so 16 out of 576 is not a high percentage number. Democrats claim that a lot of these polling stations earlier today failed to open up on time. They were 25, 35 minutes late. As a result, some of these polling stations, 16 in all, will be given an additional 90 minutes tonight. That's one storyline so far tonight. The other one is where we are here. We're at headquarters for the Democratic challenger, Sherrod Brown, and some of the Democratic strategists here telling me tonight, Britt, that they see higher numbers of African-American voters in cities like Dayton, in Columbus, and Cincinnati. They think that portends good news for them and their candidate. They also saw in southeastern Ohio higher Democratic turnout there as well. A two-part reason for that. Number one, they think it helps Sherrod Brown, and also they think it helps the Democratic challenger for governor, Ted Strickland. That is his home district that he exited to run for governor in 2006. Conversely, what they're saying in southwestern Ohio, specifically Claremont County, which is a strong Republican area, they're saying that voter turnout there has been low. We heard that from Republicans a bit earlier today. That could be significant from two perspectives. If Claremont County is lower, it certainly does not help the Republican Mike DeWine, but also that's the home district, District 2, for the Republican Jean Schmidt. She is said to be in an absolute dogfight with her Democratic challenger. Jean Schmidt is the one who took on John Murtha last fall when he came out with his strong comments about the war in Iraq. Claremont County, historically, going back for decades, has been very strong favored in the Republican Party. Now, if voter turnout was low, it may mean something or another for Jean Schmidt, but certainly too close for us to call here. Polls were supposed to close at 7:30 across the state. Most of them will. The strong majority of them will, with the exception of those 16 polling stations here in Cuyahoga County in the area of Cleveland, Ohio. Britt, we'll know soon enough.
All right. Thanks very much, Bill. Of course, Cuyahoga County was a place where John Kerry turned out more voters than anybody had ever seen turned out in a presidential election for him in 2004, and it led Democrats on that night to believe that the state of Ohio was going to be theirs. It did not turn out that way, and one of those who was quick to recognize the places where Republicans were able to find voters that some people didn't think might even have existed was Michael Barone. Michael, your thoughts about what you see happening tonight in Cuyahoga County and elsewhere in Ohio?
Well, obviously the Democrats want to maximize their turnout in Ohio. We have their word for it that it's been good. We'll see what the numbers show when they come in. But Cuyahoga County, which is Cleveland and its immediate suburbs to the east, south, and west, cast 12% of Ohio's votes, and in 2004 it voted 67 to 33% for John Kerry. That was a big margin. It produced a bigger popular vote margin. But George Bush carried the state by 49%, and that's partly because he vastly increased the turnout in places like Claremont County, which Bill referred to, just east of Cincinnati, Warren County to the northeast of Cincinnati, Delaware County to the north of Columbus, Medina County southwest of Cleveland. Those are Ohio's exurban counties, which have had the greatest population growth in the state since the 2000 census. And they also increased turnout in low population growth rural areas.
All right, Michael, thanks very much. We're coming up on 7:30, which, as Bill Hemmer noted earlier, is when the polls close. We were going to say in Ohio. We can, I think, fairly now say in most of Ohio. Also in two other places as well. We may have something to say about those. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned. In just a minute here, or just less than a minute, we're going to be noting the closing of the polls in the state of Virginia. I mean, in a couple of states, West Virginia among them, Ohio and elsewhere. But we are watching, have been watching a ballot initiative in the state of Virginia, which is one of these amendments that defines marriage as between a man and a woman and only between a man and a woman. He's now reached 730. We can tell you that Senator Robert C. Byrd, who many of you probably didn't even know was up this year, has won re-election as he was expected to do. That was a race that was never close. That means that he is one of the longest serving senators in history. He's been in Congress since the 40s. And here we are in the next century. So Robert Byrd will go around again as a United States Senator. He is the Dean of the Senate by far now, I believe. In the meantime, let's talk a little bit with my colleague Jim Angle, who's keeping an eye on ballot initiatives, about that initiative in Virginia and what we can conclude about it. Jim?
Well, Brett, any ballot initiative dealing with gay marriage obviously brings out a lot of social conservatives. It was thought to have a big impact, of course, in the 2004 election, especially in Ohio. Now, what you have in Virginia now is with a small number reporting, but I believe we are calling this, that the gay marriage amendment, the one outlawing gay marriage and anything that gives it any legal status, also not recognizing any gay marriages or gay unions from other states, we now have passing at 58 to 42%. Obviously, as many other states do, defines marriage as the union between a man and a woman and prohibits legalization of civil unions. Now, this is something that brings out voters who might not otherwise come out, pollsters say, people who care a great deal about this issue. This hits a nerve with a lot of people. As I was saying, it hit a nerve in Ohio in 2004 and is thought to have helped President Bush get reelected there because it brought out a lot of voters who wouldn't otherwise have gone to the polls. This would be very good news for George Allen if, in fact, it brought out a lot of social conservatives. Though Jim Webb is not all that liberal himself, but obviously George Allen more conservative of the two.
All right, so we're calling that a win for that, even though we're dealing with some small fraction of the returns showing it leading, 58 to 42. If you've been watching the bottom of our screen, you probably have noted that we show George Allen with a similar margin, but based on 3% of the vote, we're not able to call that. So that was that ballot initiative, it should be noted, was leading in the pre-election day polls. So based upon that, obviously, and what we have of the raw vote, we're able to make a call. Though we're nowhere near ready to make a call in the Allen versus Webb Senate race. So some thoughts about this panel from, does this look to you as if this might be the kind of a measure that will affect the other races?
It doesn't, not necessarily. If we look at our Fox telephone poll of Virginia today, it looks like a third of those who believe there should be no legal recognition for gay or lesbian same-sex relationships. In other words, a third of those who presumably voted for that Virginia marriage amendment also voted for Jim Webb. Jim Webb did a pretty good job in the Virginia Senate race, it looks like, in taking the edge off Senator Allen's identification with social conservatives and making himself acceptable to at least enough of social conservatives to fight a very competitive race. It also shows this was considered to be a badly drafted amendment. I mean, I don't know if it was or not, but that's what some people said.
That's what the argument was made against it.
Right, and there was some sense that if a gay marriage amendment or an anti-same-sex marriage amendment would finally lose, this would be the state it lost in. If it won, I think it shows the power of the marriage issue. People do want marriage defined as between a man and a woman, and they don't want judges defining marriage.
There are two states where you have this marriage amendment that I think it could have made a difference in Senate races this year. One is Virginia, the other Tennessee, with the Harold Ford-Bob Corker race, and Corker was using it aggressively in that race. It's interesting, you know, that the New Jersey Supreme Court was the one that had the ruling shortly before Election Day. It's not an issue in New Jersey where you have Kane versus Menendez, and you would have thought that it would have been exploited there, but in fact it's in Virginia and Tennessee where I think we're going to see that issue make a difference potentially. But as Bill was saying, if it's possible that Webb co-opted it, that he took it for his own, that would be a surprise.
Well, the other thing there, of course, is that Allen didn't make much of it. Allen had a tough campaign going back to this gaffe in August, and he never really recovered his footing, and that's what he was trying to do, and he probably should have used the marriage amendment more than he did. Brett, I wanted to say something about, we were talking about Ann Northup running in Louisville, and this is an example of how things change from the prior election in a year that's bad. 2004 was a good year for Republicans. President Bush was reelected. She got 60% of the vote in a district where Bush only got 49%. Now she's struggling to get 50% plus one. And it's true in many, many other districts. You know, the easiest ones for the Democrats to gain are the open Republican seats. And the polls that Fox did by telephone shows that Democrats winning a couple of those. One in Ohio, the seat of Bob Ney, which was...
They're leading in them in the poll.
Yeah, they're leading at him, and the one in Ohio by a substantial margin, and then one in Minnesota as well. And then you get to the marginal seats, the ones where the parties are sort of evenly divided. If Democrats dig deeply into those, then they're going to have a big night. And that's why a seat like Ann Northup's, which is a marginal seat, there are more Democrats in it than Republicans, and yet she has won. If they can win that one, I think it's an indicator that they're going to do pretty well in these marginal seats.
There's nothing about that race that we know, if I'm not mistaken, that indicates that something that she did or said or something that happened in that race, she's simply identified with an R next to her name in a year when... And of course, obviously, like every Republican, she supported President Bush in a number of ways.
It is a marginally Democratic district in that John Kerry carried it with 51% of the vote. But she's always been able, on the strength of her popularity, to carry that district. Going back to Virginia, our Fox poll showed that Jim Webb would win that race 51-45. Now, going into these. The latest polls on that before the election showed that that Webb was leading by 1.5%. If our poll is right, he's leading by 3%, which is you know, a significant jump from that. And in that Virginia 2 congressional race, where Thelma Drake was one of those, that's a very strongly Republican district. And if she loses that seat, that's another one of those that the Republicans did not think that they were going to lose, and that is another kind of case like Ann Northup, where this is an incumbent, a strong incumbent, who would be losing, indicating that it's going to be a big Democratic night.
Let's take a look at a graphic that will show us where polls have closed in terms of House races. This is in, and you're looking. This is the 7:30 closings. Just happened 7 minutes ago. As you can see, there's a cluster of important congressional districts in Ohio, which are in contention. A couple in West Virginia and one down in North Carolina. That's Western North Carolina, the Asheville area, where veteran Congressman Charles Taylor has been in re-election trouble for some time. He has been considered to be someone who's had some ethical issues raised about him, which is lethal or can be lethal in this particular year. So those are ones we're taking a look at, and we're also interested, of course, in what the exit polls may have to tell us, especially about the races in Ohio. And for that, my colleague Chris Wallace. Chris?
Britt, we're going to get to those Ohio congressional races in just a moment, but first the Ohio Senate race, where Democratic challenger Sherrod Brown appears to have a sizable lead over Republican incumbent Senator Mike DeWine. In fact, he's had it for weeks in all the polls. And one of the big reasons, what a difference 2 years has made. Ohio, of course, was the state that put George W. Bush over the top in the 2004 presidential election. But now look at those figures. There are now negative feelings towards the president. 38% approve of the job Mr. Bush is doing, while 60% disapprove. There's also a negative rating for the Iraq War. 41% approve, while 58% disapprove. So those are problems. Headwind for all Republican candidates in Ohio, in addition to, of course, they've had some local scandals in Ohio. In addition to the exit polls, Fox News, as we've been mentioning all night, has its own exclusive telephone poll with 900 voters in Ohio, and we've focused on 3 key House races. In the 1st Congressional District, or Ohio 1, 7-term Republican incumbent Steve Chabot appears to be trailing Democratic challenger John Cranley, according to our telephone poll, 57% to 42%. Again, it's a telephone poll, not an exit poll of actual voters. In Ohio 15, incumbent Republican Congresswoman Deborah Price, chairwoman of the Republican Conference, which makes her number 4 in the House Republican leadership, is trailing Democratic challenger Mary Jo Kilroy, 51% to 46% in our phone poll. Now, this race has been very closely watched for weeks to see what fallout there is from House Republican scandals. And speaking of scandals, in Ohio 18, the district where Congressman Bob Ney recently resigned because of his involvement in the Abramoff scandal, our Fox News telephone poll shows Democrat Zach Space, a municipal attorney, leading Republican State Senator Joy Padgett, listen to this, 60% to 36%. that has always been considered a very tough race for Republicans, and it looks like it is tonight. So in Ohio, both at the state level and in 3 key congressional races, problems for the GOP tonight. Brett?
But nothing upon which we can make a single call, correct?
That's exactly right. Nothing to make a call either in the Senate race. And, of course, these telephone polls, we're not going to make any calls on those tonight.
No, obviously not. And at the rate we're going with the exit polling and the skepticism we feel about them based on past record and some of what we've seen tonight, you know, we're going to do the best we can, folks, to use them for analysis purposes, but we're even skeptical of them for that.
Brett, as they say, Brett, we don't know where we're going, but we're making good time.
Yeah, that's right. We're making good time, and we're going to make a little time here for our sponsors. We're taking a break. We'll be right back. The development of the internet, and specifically the World Wide Web, has affected American politics in a multitude of ways. One of the most notable has been the development of politics in what's called the blogosphere. This is this vast community of people who, as individuals, sit down at their computers and they write what's called a blog, and record their thoughts, their analysis, their opinion, and sometimes their reporting. They're not always right about everything, but they often have something interesting to say. They may pick up on points that the rest of us miss. And the smart reporters have gotten in the habit of checking in with the blogosphere. And we have our own blogger here tonight, our own Michelle Malkin, who is herself a noted blogger and who has been keeping an eye on her comrades in the blogosphere. Michelle, what are you seeing?
Hey, I'm seeing a lot of activity, Brett. It's been a busy day for the army of poll watchers in the blogosphere. And YouTube has been a ubiquitous force throughout the campaign, and it has been today at redstate.com, which is a leading conservative blog. You've got YouTube video posted of poll worker intimidation, and that certainly has been one of the big stories of the day on both sides of the aisle in the blogosphere, monitoring all sorts of campaign shenanigans and potential quote-unquote harassment or intimidation at these poll sites. So you've got video being posted on YouTube, not only from the right, but also from the left. And there has been a far more organized and vast effort, a well-funded effort on the left as well. And you can see that at videothevote.com, where a number of documentarians have gotten together to pool their resources and put their own video of so-called harassment and intimidation. And related to that, Britt, we've had a lot of original reporting on the blogosphere, originating on the left side of the blogosphere about so-called robocalls. And here's something that actually unites the left and right side of the blogosphere, these annoying automated phone calls. And you've had a lot of audio and transcripts posted, and a lot of claims that these have been deceptive on both sides of the aisle. You see that at the Talking Points memo site and on aggregator sites like Memorandum, where you can see opinion from both sides of the blogosphere on those robocalls. And now, of course, there is a federal investigation into some of those calls in Virginia. Finally, talking about the Democrats' preemptive strategy to undermine the results of the election, whatever there are, we've got reports now that MoveOn.org and being disseminated by the Daily Kos, the far-left blogger site, are offering $250,000 as a reward for people to scavenger hunt across the country for evidence of intimidation. So that's what's going on right now in the blogosphere, Brett.
What about the robocalls? These are calls, I guess, that are recorded by celebrities and then the automated dialing gets into play, and you pick up the phone and somebody says, "Hello, I'm Laura Bush," and you say, "Hello, Mrs. Bush," and the recording keeps going, and it dawns on you that the real person is not calling you; it's a robocall. And I guess some people have gotten a lot of these. Has that been the issue?
It certainly has. Repeat calls in several cases, and blogs have been reporting everyone from John McCain to Joe Piscopo to Hillary Clinton, I think, placing these calls, and they happen at the dinner hour, which is very annoying, whatever your political stripes are. And I think the most serious charges involve deception and the people receiving the calls claiming that Republicans are posing as Democrats and vice versa.
All right, Michelle, we'll be back to you. We'll be back to you often. Thanks very much for getting us up to date on what's going on in the world of the blogosphere. This whole question about voter contacts that Michelle at least indirectly raises by the mention of these robocalls. This has been a point of pride with Republicans in recent days and in recent elections, that they have been able to mount a turnout effort in part by the fact that they've made X thousands of numbers of voter contact calls. I suppose that what the people left and right in the blogosphere are complaining about tonight, that it isn't just the quantity of the calls, but it matters to some extent what exactly you're hearing. One wonders also, of course, is you can record the number of contacts, but what does that, how much does that get you?
Now, we were told the Republican National Committee had been very proud of the fact that they were making millions and millions of voter contacts, and their 72-hour machine is supposed to be wonderful in delivering votes for Republicans. If it turns out that these are largely robocalls, that's different from what we were led to believe, that this was members of a church, contacting somebody being connected.
Well, that has been a hallmark of the Republicans.
It absolutely
they
has.
got down to the sort of the neighborhood level, found somebody that knew somebody, and they got them to make
and micro-targeting, knowing what...
That's what micro-targeting is all
But the other half of it is, and this is what Michelle, I think, was touching on, is that there are repeat calls being made, and that people would view as harassing calls. And then sometimes what happens is there's the suggestion that this call is coming from actually not the person that's not actually making the call. The Democrat appears to be making the call when actually it's coming from Republicans who are trying to anger the voter and think
so
that
there's fraud.
There's fraud, and that's what's starting some of these investigations, that there's fraud involved. And harassment.
Well, that's an example of something. We're kind of in debt to the bloggers in the blogosphere for staying on top of this stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've learned a lot from reading the blogs in the last few days, in addition to my wife, who's gotten 3 of these robocalls.
Oh, really?
She just got the straight ones, She had a nice chat with Laura Bush.
Somewhat one-sided.
Well, it wasn't right. I think she's on the standard Republican list. I think what the blogosphere has called attention to are calls which really are deceptive and sort of scurrilous, where they say, do you think, perverts should be let out of, child molesters should be let out of prison? But no? Well, then you won't want to vote for Juan Williams because,
That's right.
And those, you get a robot doing it. There's no return phone number. It's hard to know who paid for it. And there are Justice Department investigations, I guess, going into this. Having said all that, it strikes me that none of this affects these races very much. When you step back from the American and look at the American electoral system, I'm sort of amazed at how 100 million people, or 75 million people are going to vote, I guess.
Yeah, but it does reveal the conspiracy mind that exists out there. I mean, these people are looking for trouble, right? And they're intent on it, and they believe someone's cheating them. That's their energy rather than getting out and getting involved in the electoral process, in my opinion.
You talking about the people who are receiving the calls and are complaining about it?
No, I'm talking people, I find a lot on the left, but also on the right. There are people who just seem to me to focus on, hey, we're being cheated this time, and the other guy is cheating, and we're going to catch him.
Yeah,
and we've got lawyers in tow right now before we know anything went wrong.
But let me say something. Turnout was up a lot in 2004 over 2000. 17 or 18 million more people voted in 2004 than 2000. I believe turnout looks like it will be up quite a bit today perhaps, over 2002. I think that is in part due to the blogs, due to the internet, which has gotten a lot of people more interested in politics, and they can find their own favorite sites.
Yeah, and it's a way they can express themselves pretty quickly. I mean, you look at this chain of comments at the end of many of these blogs that are part of the blogs, and people have a say, and other people read it. I mean, it takes you out of this sense of anonymity and emptiness or loneliness.
George Allen would be winning. George Allen would be winning this race, I think, if it weren't for the blogs and for YouTube.
Really?
Well, they magnified this error, this stupid thing he said to this young macaca, to this web volunteer. Then they magnified other things he said.
Well, what do you think John Kerry feels?
Well, that's exactly
John
right.
Kerry.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That excerpt from his speech where he dumped on, he says he didn't, but when it looked like he dumped on the troops in Iraq, that was on YouTube. Again, this website that picks up clips, of sports and politicians and what they say and do.
And then, of course, there are the questions about the voting machines. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but first, a break. Stay tuned. And that, of course, is a race we're going to be watching very closely tonight. We just have a fraction of precincts in, 15% now, showing George Allen ahead. George Allen would like very much to win that race, and it's been a wild and woolly affair the whole time. That is a state in which we have already noted that the marriage ballot initiative, which confines marriage to one man and one woman, has carried that state. But We knew that when only 3% were in, but the Webb and Allen race remains clearly too close to call. The other side of things, of course, is the House of Representatives. We're watching a whole host of races there tonight to see if we can pick out a few early returns that would tell us which way that is all going to go. For more on that, let's turn to my colleague down in Washington, our congressional correspondent, Major Garrett. Hi, Major.
Hello, Britt. Let me talk to you a little bit about the atmospherics here in Washington on this election night. The Democrats and their House Campaign Committee are running a website with instantaneous Secretary of State results for all the hot House races. That shows you how aggressive they are to see the results. Republicans' National Congressional Committee is not. The Speaker of the House, the Republican Dennis Hastert's not in Washington. Where is he? Back in his district in Illinois. The person who might be the new Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, the current House Minority Leader, she's here in Washington right now, making herself very visible to the cameras. Reporters were brought in to see her and the DCCC, that's the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee Chairman, Rahm Emanuel, talk about their optimism about tonight's results. Well, let's go to some key races. Kentucky's third. We talked about that a little bit earlier. That's Ann Northup against John Yarmouth. It's almost 66% of the vote in now, Britt, counted in Kentucky, and Ann Northup is now trailing in that race. The results, she's got 49.3%. That is Ann Northup. John Yarmouth, 50.7%. A bad sign for Republicans because that was a race they wanted to hold. Let's go to Indiana's 2nd district. That's Chris Chicola, the Republican running against Democrat Brad Ellsworth, a law and order person from that district in Indiana. President Bush was just in the Chicola district. I was received a lot of calls this weekend about a strong Republican get out the vote effort there. Chicola in that district, according to my numbers that I can see on the website, up 50.2%. Over Ellsworth, 49.8%, a very tight race, one Republicans will be watching to see. If they lose that race, that will be another sign that they might be suffering from a Democratic wave. And Britt, let's talk about a race that attracted the attention of the country for possibly all the wrong reasons. Florida 16, Joe Negron, who was the last-minute substitute replacement for disgraced Republican Congressman Mark Foley. He is a write-in candidate who has to have people actually vote for Mark Foley to elect him to Congress. With 10% of the vote in that 16th congressional district, Britt, Negron has 50.5% of the vote. His Democratic challenger, Tim Mahoney, 49.5%. Neck and neck, Republicans thought they might have a chance of pulling a cat out of the bag in that one, winning a race that Democrats thought was theirs as soon as the Foley scandal broke. That's a quick look at some of the races we're keeping an eye on, Britt.
All right, Major, thanks very much. We'll come back to you early and often, particularly on a couple of those races out in the Midwest, see if we can clarify that picture a little bit. In the meantime, let's turn to my colleague, our chief political correspondent, Carl Cameron, who is keeping an eye on Senate races. Carl.
Hi, Britt. Well, one of the races that has been getting a tremendous amount of attention in the last couple of weeks is Tennessee. And there, this is an open seat, essentially. The majority leader, Bill Frist, the outgoing Republican leader of the Republican conference, is abandoning that seat, many say, to go out and look for the White House run in 2008. Harold Ford Jr. had been up a couple of weeks ago, and his Republican opponent, Bob Corker, was able to turn the race ostensibly to a referendum on Harold Ford Jr. as opposed to the war in Iraq, which is what Democrats had been trying to do. This race, by all accounts, is going to be decided in the suburbs around Nashville. Tennessee is one of these states that's sort of divided evenly, with a lot of conservatives on the eastern part of the state and more liberal voters in the western part of the state. And this particular race is perhaps in the Senate one of the best examples of how Republicans are facing tough challenges from conservative Democrats. Harold Ford Jr. Ran against Nancy Pelosi for the speakership, rather the Democratic leadership of the House minority a couple of years ago. He calls himself a pro-gun, pro-life Democrat. And a lot of places where we're seeing Democrats really surging forward across the country is driven on candidacies by conservative Democrats. Of course, Bob Corker, the former mayor of Chattanooga, completely challenges and disputes the conservatism of Harold Ford Jr., but it's instructive to watch across the country how these Democrats, who tend to be particularly on social issues a little bit more conservative than the blue plate of their party, may actually see the evening unfold. And in House races and Senate races alike, these conservative Democrats, if they do bring in Democratic majorities, will then turn around and watch a lot of liberals lead the party. Brett.
All right, we've been watching, as I mentioned. Thank you, Carl. We've been watching, as I mentioned, some of these close races, particularly in Indiana. We are now going to say that Brad Ellsworth, who is the sheriff of that county out there around Evansville, running against the incumbent Republican Brad Hostetler. Hostetler has been a surprising come-from-behind winner in race after race after race. Fox News is projecting tonight, not this time. Brad Ellsworth winning over John Hostetler. Hostetler a loser out there. This is a gain for the Democratic Party in a place where they thought they had a good chance of gaining. A lot of people thought it would be a miracle. Of all the endangered Republicans in the state of Indiana, Hostetler appeared to be the most endangered. We're coming up in just about 30 seconds now on the 8 o'clock hour, and a whole passel of states will have closed by that time. You can see a bunch of them are going to close at 8 o'clock. They're listed left and right of your screen there, and we'll be able to tell you a little bit about some of the races in there as well. Fred, you had a comment on that Hostetler race?
Brad Ellsworth, who beat Hostetler, is pro-life, pro-gun, has even signed Grover Norquist's tax pledge not to raise taxes. How he'll get along with the liberal Democrats in the House, and Nancy Pelosi in particular, will be interesting to watch.
Yeah, well, this is a pattern. Carl mentioned it as well. A lot of Democrats running to the right of their party's mainstream, so to speak.
Yeah, but none of them more than Ellsworth.
8 o'clock. Here we come with a bunch of. We cannot yet call the Virginia Senate race. The polls have been closed there for some time. That one still remains too close to call. But as you can see, it's getting tighter. McCaskill and Talent, we have nothing to say about that, although because the polls are just now closing out there in Missouri, and we'll begin to get some tabulation from there as well. Similarly, in Pennsylvania, Santorum thought to be well behind Casey there. But we have no numbers yet to show you on that. And the U.S. Senate, I don't know what that's all about. The Maryland Senate, Cardin and Steele, polls just closing there in Maryland. Very close race, nothing to show you on that, still too close to call. New Jersey Senate, same thing. That's a mistake, obviously. His name is not Payson. All right, Connecticut U.S. Senate, that's a three-way race. Schlesinger, the Republican, hopelessly behind. Lieberman thought a likely winner as an independent over the Democrat Lamont, whose hopes were so high only a few months back. And now we do project a winner in the Massachusetts Senate race. I bet many of you didn't know that Ted Kennedy was running for re-election this year. Well, he is, and he has won by our projection. Similarly, in Mississippi, well, we had it up there for a second. Mississippi, we're projecting Trent Lott a winner. We're also projecting Olympia Snowe a winner over her challenger in the state of Maine. That, again, not a surprise. Many of you probably hadn't heard much about that race. That's because it wasn't close. So there, as best we can show them to you, is a bunch of races in states where the polls have closed. Florida U.S. Senate as well. We project Bill Nelson a winner over Katherine Harris. Some polls that showed her behind by even more than that current margin with 10% in. But there has been little doubt for a long time that she would win. That she would lose there. Many of the Republican elders in Washington and elsewhere did not want her to run for the Senate, but she insisted on doing it. She's quite popular within the Republican Party, at least among a lot of voters, and so she won the primary. And the result was what they feared. The Democrats hold a seat that had been thought at least some time ago to be vulnerable to the Democrats, a possible pickup for the Republicans. So, panel. What are we seeing out of this? Juan, your thoughts on the nature of the candidates who seem to be doing well tonight as Democrats and what they believe in?
Well, I'm just, the Ann Northup one is so striking because I find Ann Northup is very moderate. She's someone who has called for Secretary Rumsfeld's resignation, and she has had differences.
Recently.
Has had differences with President Bush about the war. But that doesn't seem to count. I think that what we're picking up is what we see in Chris Wallace's numbers, that people are running against a strong tide, Republicans are running against a strong tide when it comes to the president and when it comes to the war. I have questions about that earlier poll that indicated that culture of corruption was a big issue.
Well, that was one of those exit poll numbers that made you kind of wonder.
Well, it certainly made me wonder. But anyway, I think what we're looking at is the war. But what's interesting to me in the Ann Northup case is I think this is someone who tried, and especially in the course of the campaign, to separate herself out from the president to get voters. She's a five-term incumbent. Try to get voters to look at her and what she delivered for them. And so you see the strategy of focusing on local issues, trying to take it away from the national referendum did not succeed for her. And that's a bad sign for the Republicans.
Looking through our poll results, it's interesting how
now you're talking about our Fox News telephone poll,
right? I haven't seen the exit poll results, so I don't know how they're running. But a significant percentage of Bush voters in 2004 are opting for Democratic gubernatorial candidates, like even Sherrod Brown. 10% of Bush voters. Sherrod Brown is very liberal. In Ohio,
he is a true blue liberal.
10% of Republicans are voting for Sherrod Brown. Now, I would think that is out of disgust with the general political climate. Ohio is a place where corruption has infected the state government, and people are running away from Republicans in droves.
And the state government heavily controlled by the Republican Party for a number of years.
And even Sherrod Brown, who is a classic labor Democrat is getting 28% of the conservative vote, which it tells you something about the disgust that voters there must have.
It might tell you something about the polls, or maybe it'll tell you something about Ohio conservatives.
Well,
I
it
don't
does
know.
tell you it's a Democratic year. I think that's.
Well, we all kind of knew that.
Well, I know. I just thought I'd mention it anyway in case you'd forgotten. Look, I'll tell you the ones I'm.
I'll write it down, Fred.
Good.
I'll make a note of it.
The races I'm kind of interested in are these ones where Democrats have gotten moderate to conservative candidates to run. So far, we saw Brad Ellsworth winning that seat in Evansville in southwestern Ohio. Another one is, again, running as Charlie Taylor in western North Carolina is Heath Shuler, who many of us remember as a great quarterback at the University of Tennessee, but a not-so-great quarterback with the Washington Redskins and the New Orleans Saints.
The remarkable thing about that story is that so passionate are Washington Redskins fans about their football team, and so important is it to them, that here's Heath Shuler, someone who, would be, one would think, an attractive young man to come to Washington as a member of Congress, and all these Redskins fans had a website up urging people to vote against him because he was such a lousy quarterback, they believe, for the Redskins, that they never wanted to see the guy in town again.
Well, he's a strong candidate, and they may see him again. He's a born-again Christian. He won't say, and conservative on, he's pro-life and so on, won't say whether he'll vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker or not.
Well, of course, we haven't projected him a winner yet. But,
no, we haven't, but all I said was he's running a strong race.
Right,
and then you go to the Senate, Jim Webb in Virginia, who's endorsed a bunch of liberal issues, but people, a whole career tells you he's a lot more conservative than he lets on, and is probably, I can't think of anyone except for former Governor Mark Warner who could run such a strong race against George Allen. And then, wait a minute, Mark, and then there's Bob Casey, who comes from a family, his father, that is known for their anti-abortion feelings. In Pennsylvania, I'm not sure whether others could have beaten Rick Santorum, but he seems to be running ahead. He has in every poll.
Well, it's worth saying, and we're saying earlier, that one of the winners, if the Democrats clean up tonight, one of the great winners in this will be Rahm Emanuel, who went around the country.
We just saw a picture there with Nancy Pelosi watching the
who was the one who recruited people who are not classic liberal Democrats to run in these various seats, but people could actually win. These are Republican seats. They had to take it with somebody who's conservative, and he found him, and he recruited him.
I think I named both of them.
Right. A lot of governorships are up tonight, as we've noted earlier, and our colleague Megan Kendall is here with the latest on them. Megan.
Hi there, Brett. Yeah, several races now to call, including in Pennsylvania, where we are now calling the race projecting that the Democrat in that state has retained his seat, Governor Ed Rendell, over challenger Lynn Swann. That's bad news to Steelers fans who wanted Swann to see that state. He was one of the only 3 black candidates running for governor. Fared better, the other black candidate in Massachusetts. Britt, Fox News is now projecting that Deval Patrick, the Democrat, has taken that seat, beating the Republican Kerry Healy, who was the lieutenant governor in that state. Fox News projecting a win for the Democrats there. In Connecticut, Fox News projecting that Governor Jody Rell will retain her seat. That's not a surprise over DeStefano. She's very well liked by Connecticut voters, despite the fact that she's a Republican. Survived a gritty battle with breast cancer, and no surprise there that she has won tonight, or as we project tonight. In Georgia, Fox News projecting that Governor Sonny Perdue will retain his seat over challenger Lieutenant Governor Mark Taylor, who is the Democrat. That, too, was not a particularly competitive race, and looks like Georgia will retain Governor Perdue, who is the first Republican governor since Reconstruction in that state. Finally, Maryland, you're looking at it there. Too close to call. That's not a shock. This has been a nail-biter. The Democrat Martin O'Malley, mayor of Baltimore, challenging Bob Ehrlich, who's been incredibly popular. His major deficit is having an R next to his name in a tough year for Republicans in a blue state. So too close to call in Maryland, and that is also the case down in Florida. Charlie Crist, the state's attorney general, running for the governorship. Too close to call against challenger Jim Davis, both of them seeking to occupy the governor's mansion after Jeb Bush steps down because of term limits in January. So those are 2 nail-biters that we still have to follow, and we will keep you updated as we get those results in. Britt?
Megan, of course, it's worth noting that Charlie Crist got himself into the news, perhaps in a way that his Republican supporters might not have liked when the president went to Pensacola. I guess it was yesterday, wasn't it, to campaign for him, among others, and Crist found other things to do than stand on a platform with the president, saying he had to be in other parts of the state.
Exactly right. He said he didn't need the votes in the Panhandle where the president went, and that he needed them over on the Atlantic Seacoast. That's where he went. The president went elsewhere. We'll see whether that helped or hurt him, presumably, tonight.
Well, if the race is as close as it seems, at least at the moment, and of course it is early, maybe it'll turn out that he needed to be somewhere else. In any case, the president got up and pitched for him anyway. So
he did indeed.
So Such is politics. Thanks, Megan, very much. We'll be back to you shortly. Is it possible to see in any of this something about, I mean, you were talking about this earlier, Juan. We're seeing Sherrod Brown, for example, winning and in Ohio, apparently. Doing very well in Ohio, a state which was carried by the president. He's an out-and-out liberal. There's no two ways about it. But more broadly speaking, we look at the candidates who appear to be doing well. Mort was talking about Rahm Emanuel's ability to recruit moderates. If this is a big Democratic night, and we don't know that yet, but there are all the pre-election indicators suggested that. Will this be a big night for liberalism or a big night for something else?
Oh, no, in a way, it's a big night for conservative Democrats if these trends hold. It looks like, you take an example like Pennsylvania 8, where you have a first-term Republican, Fitzpatrick versus Murphy.
That's the Philadelphia suburbs, right?
Philadelphia suburbs, Levittown, Doylestown, Quakertown, that whole area just south of New Jersey. A little bit of the northern part of the city of Philadelphia is right in there. And what you get is an Iraqi war veteran, Murphy, running against and saying, here's my position on the war. But if you stop and you ask Murphy, well, what are your positions in terms of social issues?
Right.
In terms of, this guy sounds like he could be a Republican.
Exactly. Bill, you had some thoughts on this in this whole area?
Yeah, I think the Democrats did a good job in many of the congressional races and some of the Senate races in recruiting moderate Democrats, especially in states that are more conservative. The other thing that seems to have happened in some of these states, looking at this poll, is our phone polls, is that Democrats are consistently getting 20–25% of the votes of self-described conservatives. That is, I think, a protest vote against either a Republican Congress that wasn't conservative on spending issues or a Republican president, President Bush, whom they're just dissatisfied with the conduct of the war. I think in Virginia in particular, I'm a Virginia resident, Fred is too, you are too, I think, Fred. Allen did not run an ideological campaign against Webb. He ran a personal campaign against Webb. Webb's a flake. Webb wrote these novels with weird scenes in them.
It was almost as if once he got caught in a personal slip of his own, he decided that was the level on which he had to hit back.
Right, and I think it may turn out to have been a huge mistake. If that marriage amendment passed in Virginia, 58-42, Webb was for it, Allen was for it, Webb was against it. He didn't run a conservative ideological campaign. He ran a campaign of personal charges against Webb, and the idea that Allen could be running something like 10 points behind the marriage amendment will lead to a lot of second-guessing, I think, of the Webb campaign, and a general second-guessing that they might have been better off in some of these states and some of these congressional districts running a more ideological campaign, really trying to make it a conservative liberal showdown. Because what's striking in these polls is the number of self-described conservatives continues to exceed the number of self-described liberals by about 3-2 or better in a lot of states, including, moderate states, not just southern states.
I don't.
Go ahead, Fred.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think there's much of an ideological element to this election at all. It's the 6th year. People are mad at the Bush administration, and when you see the top issues being corruption in Iraq and Iraq, not in Iraq, although there's some there too, those are not particularly ideological issues. They're conservative. Liberals are against the war, but so are a lot of conservatives and moderates. So there's not really that ideological dimension that you often see. There are a lot of voters who are just angry and protesting.
Okay, we're going to take a break here. On the other side of it, though, we're going to go to Michael Barone and talk about what is emerging as kind of the all-important early state of Indiana. Stay tuned. The pace of things may be picking up just a little bit. There you see us. That's me. That's me up in Times Square. Can you imagine? My name and lights, my traffic. So, in the meantime, though, for the benefit of those in Times Square in particular, let's turn to my colleague Megan Kendall, who is going to have something to tell us about about some of these governor's races. A couple of calls, I believe. Megan?
Yeah, I got to take the opportunity to say hi, Mom, too, so now that you brought it up, Britt. Yeah, actually, we've got some governor results in Tennessee and in New Hampshire. Not a huge surprise in either state. Both governors, Fox News now predicting will retain their seats in Tennessee. Governor Phil Bredesen, Fox News projecting he will prevail over challenger Jim Bryson, who was a state senator. And in New Hampshire, Fox News projecting now that Governor John Lynch, a Democrat, will retain his seat over challenger Jim Coburn. One interesting thing about that Tennessee race, Britt, it was so non-competitive that's why most of the candidates in that state were vying for the seat being vacated by Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist and not trying to oust the governor because so formidable a candidate was he. And now, of course, it looks like he has pulled it out again tonight. Britt?
Megan, thank you very much. I'm sure our viewers in Times Square enjoyed that as well. Let's turn now to someone else who might please everyone in Times Square, and that is our colleague Martha McCallum, who is out at Menendez headquarters in New Jersey with word on how things have been going out there and what the feeling is there. Martha, pardon me.
Hello there, Brett. Good evening. We're in the home of, Bruce Springsteen and Frank Sinatra and Bon Jovi. This room is rocking right now at Menendez headquarters. They're feeling optimistic. Although one thing that I would mention is that there was some reservation about moderate turnout in areas like Camden County, Union County, Hudson County. Those are the bedrock of the Democratic Party in New Jersey. Very optimistic words that we've been hearing about turnout from the Republican side, from Tom Kean Jr.'s side in counties like Bergen County, Hunterton County, some of the more affluent areas of New Jersey where Tom Kean Jr. has been said to be polling pretty well. This has been a race that has been hinging on ethics. Tom Kean Jr. has tried to paint Bob Menendez with the brush of being connected to waterfront politics, where he hails from in Hoboken, New Jersey. But I would also point out that some of the exit polls that we're getting a look at now, these are coming from AP, and a lot of the focus of the voters that they have been talking to is based on Iraq, and that is what Bob Menendez has been trying to make this race all about. It's 6 in 10 say they were disappointed with how things are going in Iraq. 1/3 of those voters said that they believe that the U.S. should withdraw now. 3/4 of them said Iraq was very important to their vote. But Tom Kean Jr. has been successful in hammering home his point of ethics questions that have been raised about Bob Menendez. All of those relating, or many of them relating, to rental properties that he has had dealings with nonprofit groups in Hudson County. So 70% of the voters that they talked to said that they believe that Tom Kean Jr. had stronger ethics. Now, some have said about New Jersey politics that New Jerseyans are more comfortable with even the question of corruption than they are with venturing out to try somebody new or somebody outside of that vein. So that may be a hard sell for Tom Kean Jr. But let's remind everybody he is the son of a very popular governor, Tom Kean, of course, who also chaired the 9/11 Commission, and his son has run on a platform that would institute a lot of those 9/11 Commission reforms, which is an idea that's very popular with Democrats as well. So a tight race here in New Jersey tonight. We're watching it very closely from Menendez headquarters. We'll continue to report back to you, Brett, as we get some more information.
All right, Martha, good to hear from you. Give us a shout when you start to pick some things up out there. We appreciate it very much.
All right, will do. Thanks,
Okay.
Brett.
In the meantime, we're going to take a little break here, and on the other side of that, we will, I promise you, get to Michael Barone on the subject of the goings-on in Indiana. Stay tuned. Indiana is a red state. It has been a red state in presidential election after presidential election. But it is, perhaps surprisingly to some, a battleground state in this year's midterm election. Nobody knows the state better, or the districts better, or the races better than my colleague Michael Barone, who is down by our decision desk. Michael.
Well, a few Hoosiers might differ with you on that, Britt, but taking a look at some of these the 3 Indiana House races. Indiana 8, that's the one we've called for Democrat Brad Ellsworth, and this was a real collapse on the part of John Hostetler, Republican, who's held it for 12 years. He doesn't raise much money. He doesn't campaign with public events. He's got his own little way of doing so. It worked for him 6 times. It did not work for him the 7th, and the first returns there were out of Vigo County, around Terre Haute in the northern part of the district, an industrial county, an area that Hostetler had lost, but he got 44% of the vote 2 years ago, only 29% now. Ellsworth was even carrying counties like Park County along I-70 between Terre Haute and Indianapolis. That county went 59% for Hostetler 2 years ago, 47% this time, a real collapse. Something similar but not as drastic seems to be happening in Indiana 2, in northern Indiana, to the 2-term Republican incumbent Chris Chicola. It's too soon to say that race is over, but St. Joseph County, which includes South Bend, an industrial area, that's an area where Chicola 2 years ago ran about even, just about 50-50. The first half of the 44% of the returns in, he was losing 65-35. Meanwhile, was also running behind in the 2 in counties, Wabash River counties like Carroll and Cass. Finally, Britt, Indiana 9, southeast corner of the state. There, the Republicans hope to hold on for Mike Sodrell, who won with 50.3% in 2004. One of their strategies, increase the turnout in places like Dearborn County on the I-74 corridor northwest of Cincinnati, fast-growing area. Turnout went up 28% since 2002. Sodrell's percentage, however, declined from 57% 2 years ago to 53%. That race is definitely too close to call now. Sodrell's running about even in Switzerland County, which in Ohio River County, historically Democratic with his previous showing. Similarly in Crawford County, another one of those historically Democratic counties that often goes Democratic in state government elections. And so the returns aren't in from the other counties. This race looks like it could go either way. But it may be that the Republican turnout drive was successful, but not all the people they turned out voted Republican.
If you work up a big turnout machine and end up delivering the other guy's voters to the polls.
Well, there's one other interesting race, Britt, on the boards there. In the Indiana 7th District, that's held by Democrat Virginia Carson. It's entirely within Marion County, city of Indianapolis. Virginia Carson's won several terms there. The initial returns showed Eric Dickerson, the Republican ahead, former car dealer, who'd attacked her. Now, I think the professionals in both parties expect that Virginia Carson will win this. There was one poll that showed the Republican Dickerson ahead. My guess is that those precincts are probably from the more Republican north central part of the city of Indianapolis, but I do not know that for sure, and we'll keep clicking on that result as the evening goes on to see if there's something of an upset going there, though I don't expect it to pan out that way.
That's Julia Carson, right?
Julia Carson,
right.
Sorry.
Okay. No problem. That's all right. You got Eric Dickerson right, although a lot of, don't be confused, folks. That's not the Eric Dickerson who was a running back great in the NFL some years ago, ran with a very upright stance, you may recall, and boy, could he run. His career didn't last long. He got hurt, right? Isn't that what happened, Fred?
He did get hurt, but he was great. Britt, can I add one thing?
Yeah, of course.
It's hard to add anything to what Mike says because he's already said so much. But these 3 districts in congressional races are swing districts. I mean, they've been held by Democrats. You know, the one that Sodrell has was Lee Hamilton's district for many years. You know, the head of one of the heads of the 9/11 Commission, and he's of course a Democrat.
Guy we all know, great guy.
A great guy. Hostetler's district was held by Frank McCloskey. It's called the Bloody Eighth, because there have been such hard-fought elections there and disputed elections so many years, but a Democrat, Frank McCloskey.
So Republicans losing there is not a case of a Republican stronghold, really, having been assaulted successfully by the other party.
No, and that's also true of the Chicola district up in the north, where Tim Romer, who was also on the 9/11 Commission, a Democrat, held, I guess, between, 1990 and 2002. My point is, these are the kind of districts that if you're having a strong year, you win. Your party wins, and Democrats have already picked off one of them.
All right.
Go ahead more quickly. A high-ranking White House official said that in the 3 Indiana seats and the 2 Kentucky seats, if the Republicans could afford, out of those 5 seats, the Republicans could afford to lose 3 and still retain the House. If they lost 4, they were in trouble. They're losing 4.
They are already losing.
They are losing 4 based on...
They've lost 1 and behind in 3.
Right. I mean, we figured that they've lost Indiana 8. They're losing in Indiana 2. The question is about Indiana 9, and we're projecting Ann Northrop. I think at least she's behind.
But that's still real close. All right, good. As we've noted, the marriage amendment that makes marriage man and woman, one man, one woman only in the state of Virginia we project 1. There is a similar measure on the ballot in Tennessee, and my colleague Jim Angle has been keeping an eye on that, along with other ballot measures. Jim's down in Washington. Jim?
Brett, that's right. In Tennessee, Amendment 1, an amendment to the state constitution, Fox News now projects that will pass, and at the moment it is winning a very healthy margin, with the votes coming in somewhere in the 80 percentiles here. You'll see the numbers 85 to 15 at the moment. It defines marriage as the union between a man and a woman. That is a constitutional amendment in the state. Now, this is one of 9 states that are dealing with this issue at the moment. 16 states have already taken action on gay marriage or marriage defining marriage as a union between a man and a woman. So this has been a pretty popular issue over the years. There are other states across the country, of course, that we will tell you about in addition to Virginia as the night wears on. There are a lot of social conservatives in Tennessee. Some of them call themselves Democrats, some Republicans. Even Harold Ford Jr., the Democratic candidate for senator, was in favor of this amendment to the state constitution. So we expect this to pass handily, which will be important because in Tennessee you have to have a supermajority for constitutional amendments. That means that they have to get more than half the number of votes that were cast in the gubernatorial election. As it stands at the moment, looks like that will not be a problem.
Now,
Brett?
Jim, are we in a position now where we can call that one as having carried? I noticed there were only, on the board you showed, there was like 1% of the vote tallied. We did something like that in Virginia with like 3%. Are we now calling that?
That's right. Fox News is now projecting that that measure will win.
Okay, great. At least we can project something this early part of the night. Thank you, Jim, very much. Folks, when you see a check, as you do at the bottom of the screen now next to Sonny Perdue's name, or did just for a moment there, the check, as you probably figured out long before I did, means we think that candidate has won. We project as much. We've got to take a break here. More on the other side. Stay tuned.
And welcome back to Fox News coverage of the 2006 congressional elections. I'm Chris Wallace at Fox News election headquarters in New York. Britt Hume is taking a brief break, and he'll be back in a couple of moments. We've been talking tonight about the headwinds Republicans are facing because of negative feelings towards the president. That is much less of a problem, though, in the key battleground state of Tennessee. In the state that George W. Bush won in 2000, you may remember, against local boy Al Gore, and again in 2004, the president's job approval rating is split right down the middle. That is much stronger than it is in other states. If you want a sense of how bitter the Senate race is between Republican Bob Corker, former mayor of Chattanooga, and Democratic Congressman Harold Ford, 2/3 of voters say that Congressman Ford has made unfair attacks against his opponent. But those same voters, by an even larger margin, say that former Mayor Corker has made unfair attacks against Harold Ford. You may remember, of course, that there was that campaign commercial which featured the alleged Playboy bunny saying, "Harold, call me," and clearly a lot of people thought that was over the line. Race is also an issue in this campaign. Harold Ford, of course, trying to become the first black senator from a southern state since Reconstruction. And more than 9 black voters in 10 are supporting him. Corker leads among white voters, but as you can see, if we can pull that one up, and there it is, by a much smaller margin. 28% of voters identify themselves as independents, and they are almost evenly split between Ford and Corker. But let's look at another area where Corker holds a distinct advantage. He leads among voters who say they attend church at least once a week by a margin of, well, you can see, 15 points. So, in Tennessee, the general environment is much more positive for Republicans than it has been in other states we've reported on tonight, and it seems to be helping Republican Senate candidate Bob Corker. Britt?
Chris, thanks very much. Bill, you had a thought about that Tennessee race.
Yeah, Chris is clearly right. I think that Tennessee seems to be a more pro-Bush state, and in our telephone poll, Corker's running a little bit ahead of Harold Ford, whereas in Virginia, for example, where there's a little more doubt about President Bush, and especially his conduct of the war, I would say doubt from a hawkish side as well as from a dovish side, incidentally. Allen seems to be trailing Webb a little bit. Still, Bush is key in this election. Listen to this. About a quarter of Tennesseans strongly approve of President Bush's job performance. They're better than 90-10 for Corker. About 40% of Tennesseans disapprove strongly of President Bush's performance. They're 90-5 for Harold Ford. Somewhat approve of Bush, 82-15 for Corker. Somewhat disapprove, 60-34 for Ford. Very high correlation between whether you strongly approve or disapprove of the president and whether you're voting for the Republican or the Democratic candidate.
And further evidence of the extent to which this election has been nationalized, unlike so many other midterm congressional races where the president is not on the ticket. He has, in effect, been on the ticket this year. Yeah. He's, in effect, been at the head of it in race after race. Question, is there any way that the president and the White House could have kept this race from being nationalized?
Well,
Juan, what do you think?
I think they could have.
How?
Well, I think the president could have. Well, he did try to stay out of it to the extent that he was going to red states. But look, he's on the front page every time he talks about Iraq. Every time he says something. Let me take a break here.
Just let me interrupt you for a second, Juan, because we're going to have a call on a race we've all been watching. We never had a lot of doubt about the outcome, but we're now projecting that Bob Casey, the son of the former governor there, will become the new senator from Pennsylvania over Rick Santorum, a man who won many an election after coming from behind late. This one proved a bridge too far. Senator-elect Bob Casey, we project by the end of the night. That's not a big surprise, but it is nonetheless a noteworthy development in the course of this race and a pickup for the Democrats, obviously. Juan, you continue. I'm sorry.
Well, I said, when he says that he's going to keep Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, when he says that Vice President Cheney, who has been a strong advocate of the war, is in place until the end of his term.
Well, he doesn't have any say with that. Vice Cheney is
well, I'm sure that he could
elected.
appeal to Vice President Cheney if he so sought to. When he makes the case that stay the course is now, a little bit more flexibility,
right.
All of that's front page news, as opposed to saying, look, go out and look at your candidate, your
right.
Republican candidate, and make a judgment as to whether or not that's a person you want to continue. One last point coming out of the poll. This poll in Tennessee indicated that if the control of the Senate next year was critical to you, very important, you voted for Harold Ford. If it's not at all important, you voted for Bob Corker.
Your thoughts on the Santorum race, Mort, if any?
Well, Santorum was figured to lose. I'll bet that when the results are in, that it's by a much larger margin than it was anticipated even in the polls.
Why do you say
seems
that?
to be, well, that seems to be the pattern of things, that the Democratic candidate is doing better than the final polls indicated, which suggests that undecideds all split their way. Incidentally, back to Tennessee.
Wait a minute, hold it. We got another call we're now able to make. This in New Jersey. This a bit of a surprise because the race had been so close. We now project that Bob Menendez, the incumbent Democrat, will win out over Tom Kean Jr., who had given him a strong fight. Menendez troubled by an investigation that was said to be going on concerning some allegedly unethical transactions. Menendez, of course, denied wrongdoing. The investigation had reached, of course, no conclusion, but it was not the kind of thing you want going on during a campaign. We project now with Fox News that Bob Menendez wins that. That had been a hoped-for pickup, although I don't recall that Kean had been ahead in any recent poll. Nonetheless, this obviously is not good news for the Republicans to lose either one of these seats, although they certainly, as you were suggesting, more expected to lose the Santorum race.
Right. Well, and the Menendez race is another indication. I mean, going into this, Menendez had about 48% of the vote running in. Now he's got, if we're right, 52%, which is a bump.
Well, that's just in the raw vote so far.
But if that kind of result pans out, all Democrats are performing somewhat better than they did in the late polling.
Yeah,
the other point I was going to make about Tennessee is, as Bill pointed out, Bush disapproval and approval correlates closely. So does Iraq war opposition and support with the Ford and the Corker.
Just to sum up briefly, we now have in the House really just a +1, don't we, for the Democrats, because we're not yet able to call very many of those House races. In the Senate, we have what, +1, the Santorum race. Menendez is a hold.
Right.
So a lot of early signs.
Well, we've got Ohio too, don't we?
Not that many concrete results.
Can I add something about Rick Santorum, who I actually know pretty well? You know, the phrase compassionate conservative has been thrown around. President Bush used it, of course, when he first ran for president in 2000. Rick Santorum really is a compassionate conservative, a conservative who really has a heart for the poor. He's kind of a big government conservative, too, because he wants government to do a great deal to lift people out of poverty. He gave what I think is probably the best speech of the entire campaign, one about warning about the threat of Islamic fascism, and he insisted on using that phrase, Islamic fascism, a warning about the threat that America faces that was as good as some of President Bush's speeches have been on this subject. Rick Santorum's was even better and was likened, well, he actually likened the warning he was giving to the one that Winston Churchill gave in the late 30s to the growing threat of Nazism.
Well, is it fair to suggest that Santorum was always kind of an upset winner when he got elected in the first place and when he was reelected, and that he was never particularly well matched, given how conservative he was, compassionate or not, to the state of Pennsylvania?
He's more conservative than the state of Pennsylvania, and this time Democrats picked out a non-liberal to run against him, Bob Casey Jr., and it worked.
There's some fascinating history here. When Rick Santorum won the first time in 1994, he defeated Harris Wofford, who was an appointed senator, and the reason that he lost was that Bob Casey's father, who was the governor of the state, was a pro-life conservative, refused to endorse Harris Wofford, and the whole Casey machine was not put to work on behalf of Harris Wofford, and as a result, Santorum won.
Okay, good.
So Casey's son has now beat
Thank you, Mort. We've got to take a break. We remind you we've just made two important calls. Santorum losing in Pennsylvania to Bob Casey, as we pointed out, and Menendez holding the Democratic seat in New Jersey. Stay tuned. And we're not able to call that race, although you see the raw vote totals show Bob Corker ahead of Congressman Harold Ford for that seat that Senate seat in Tennessee. That, of course, is the seat being vacated by Bill Frist and is one the Republicans badly want to hold. In addition, we're not going to be able to tell you anything more than we have about the state of Virginia, where we show George Allen slightly ahead. There's a reason why we're not going to be able to call either of those races. Sometimes you'll see us make calls in races where the raw vote have the person we think is going to win behind. We're not able to do that in either of those races, and Michael Barone, who's down with our decision team, knows why. Michael?
The reason, Britt, is that the range of the margin of error in the vote estimate that comes from our exit poll is really wider than the indicated margin between these two candidates. So we can't really be sure with sufficient confidence levels to justify making a call, which is up to, I think, 99% confidence or more, 99.5, to do so when there's just too much possibility that the poll has missed it by just enough to get the call wrong.
We have some overall problems with the poll too, don't we, in terms of the sample and the apparent high likelihood of a bias in it, correct?
Well, that's right. We've got a problem with, you always have a problem about getting your sample fully reported. If you've got 65 or 90 sample points, precincts that you're sampling in a particular state, not all of them are going to be returned on time. Not all of them are going to report the third tranche of exit polls on time. So there'll be some missing data, and there are formulas and ways to deal with that, but the fact is that you don't want to go too far out in a limb. In addition, the people at the decision desk tell me that they believe that there's at least a 6-point error, statistical bias toward the Democratic side in the sampling data that they're looking at. And in fact, if you go back to the 1990, at least back to the 1992 exit polls, what we've found is that the exit polls have always tended to overstate the Democratic percentage by varying amounts. They did so particularly in the high turnout years of 1992 and 2004, and there are some indications that this might be, at least in some states, a high turnout area high turnout year for an off year in 2006. The late Warren Matofsky was really the father of exit polling back at CBS, and then with his own firm, Matofsky Research. The firm still remains a partner in the Edison-Matofsky Research poll. Went back after the 2000 exit poll and tried to track down where there was error, where the exit poll reports from the interviewers did not match the actual vote in the precinct where they were sampling voters. Interestingly, he found that the biggest sampling error was where the exit pollster was a female graduate student, a young woman. And all those errors tended to overstate the Democratic vote at that precinct. So as a result, Edison-Matofsky this time has attempted to hire fewer young interviewers and on the theory that for whatever reasons, either the way they proceeded themselves or the response they were getting from voters was biasing the sample. Warren Matofsky noted, Warren Matofsky was a friend of mine, and in fact I had lunch with him in Mexico 2 days before the election there, makes the point that a lot of Americans, half of Americans won't take the exit poll. When he did it in Mexico and Russia, just about everybody wanted to fill out the exit poll form.
Okay, good. Thanks very much. Now, Harry Reid, the Senate Minority Leader, at least so far, and Chuck Schumer are out and having something to say about how this is going. As you can see, Senator Schumer looks pretty happy. Let's listen.
We have won in Ohio. They've declared us the winners in Ohio and Pennsylvania. And Senator Reid and I just spoke to Bob Menendez, and New Jersey is in our corner, too. And we are right now biting our nails about Virginia, which is neck and neck. But I've been told by someone pretty authoritative that a lot of the northern parts of Virginia, where we're going to do very well, have not yet been counted. So let us hope. So let me just say, we're not going to speak for too long here, but we really care about taking our country back, about giving, about changing the course in Iraq, overseas, about helping average people pay the bills, the tuition bills and the prescription drug bills and the health care bills and the energy bills. And that is why we are so passionate and so concerned about this election. We want to thank all of you. We're not breaking out the champagne bottles yet. It's going to be a long night, but so far...
All right. Well, you get a sense of the mood at Democratic headquarters there in Washington, but you heard Senator Schumer say that the Democrats had won that Senate seat in Ohio. Well, what we've been trying to do here, folks, is to not call races before all the polls are closed. You may remember that we reported earlier that a judge had ordered some of those Ohio polls kept open to benefit people who had been unable to vote when they showed up earlier, and there was a delay in opening the polls. But the overwhelming majority of those polls are closed, and the margin is such now that we are able, and have been for some time able, to project Sherrod Brown the winner. And if Senator Schumer hadn't taken the toothpaste out of the tube, we would have probably maintained our silence, but the cat's out of the bag now. That is a gain for the Democrats over the incumbent Republican Senator Mike DeWine, who really tried to be as consonant as a Republican can be with the state of Ohio, which, while a red state, is very much a mixed state. He is in the category, I think, of Republicans who can be considered collateral damage of a kind in this race. It wasn't that they hated him so much, it was that they wanted to register a protest, and it seems tonight that in Ohio they have. That's a pickup, as we've noted, for the Democrats. Out in Ohio, our colleague Bill Hemmer has been poised to give us a word on how it's feeling out there. Bill, now that we know at least about one of those races out there, what are you hearing?
Yeah, we're at Sherrod Brown headquarters here. We have not seen the candidate. We don't expect until sometime after 10 o'clock local time, which by my watch, it's about an hour and 13 minutes from now. Here was the rub in Ohio late tonight as the polls were closing. Democrats went to a judge that they were granted this injunction that allowed 16 polling stations to stay open an extra 90 minutes. One of the most ironic things we've heard about all day, Britt, frankly. So often we hear about disenfranchised voters from poor white Americans or poor African Americans. This was the eastern part of Cuyahoga County, which encompasses Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is one of the richest places you will find in the country. And as a matter of fact, it's one of the richest places you'll find in the entire world, the area of Shaker Heights. Those voters said to be disenfranchised. The judge rules to the Democratic Party and keeps them open to an extra 90 minutes. Now, state law says the counties cannot report the results to the Secretary of State's office in Columbus, Ohio, the capital, until the polls are closed. That would mean we're 13 minutes away from some of those numbers coming out, Britt, but Chuck Schumer, as you say, let the lid off that one. We will see Sherrod Brown here sometime tonight, and so many of us analyzed that Senate race saying Mike DeWine had fallen behind in the month of October and all this polling that was taking place by no fault of his own either. There was a poison atmosphere here in the Buckeye State. It was started through corruption by the outgoing governor, Bob Taft, who about a year ago had to stand before a judge and plead guilty to 4 misdemeanors, including taking tickets for sporting events that he never reported. Bob Taft goes out. The corruption charge follows him. In addition, Bob Ney, resigning his position, caught up in the Jack Abramoff scandal too, really worked against Mike DeWine, and it was projected to go against him, and appears to have done just that tonight here in Ohio, Britt.
All right, Bill, thanks very much. We're going to take a brief break here. Much more to come when we come back. Stay with us. Ever on the lookout for new and useful pieces of technology, we here at Fox News have tried to do what the NFL has done and what John Madden has mastered, and that is the kind of a screen where you can actually show some of the action and illustrate it. And we have turned the job over to Bill Kristol, who can show us how this device will be used to show you how things are changing in the Senate. First, Bill?
I think, Britt, this device is officially called a telestrator, but I'm going to call it a gizmo.
A gizmo. It is a gizmo.
But I consider myself the John Madden.
Gizmo.
I consider myself the John Madden of this group.
All right.
Okay, let's look at the Senate here. There were 2 Democratic seats, Maryland and New Jersey, that looked as if they, wait, I'm going to change this here. Okay, there we go. New Jersey and Maryland that looked possible for the Republicans. We have called New Jersey as a Democratic hold, and we have called Ohio and Pennsylvania as Democratic pickups, 2 Republican incumbents knocked off in Ohio and Pennsylvania. The Democrats now would need to hold Maryland, which we consider still too close to call, between Steele and Cardin, and win 4 more seats to win control of the Senate. The 4 most likely are Virginia, which is neck and neck, Missouri, which is closed, and I haven't seen much vote on yet, Rhode Island, which closes at 9, and Montana, which also I think closes at 9. And so we will know fairly soon, I assume, what's happening in Virginia, maybe then Missouri, and then we need to watch Rhode Island and Montana. That would be 6, and if they hold Maryland, they would win the Senate.
All right, and it sounded as if, just listening to Senator Schumer, who was radiating exuberance, I think it's fair to say, although he was saying some cautious things, but he seemed to think that it's going to be a while before we'll be able to know for sure that the Senate has changed hands, if it does.
If it does, because Maryland is up in the air, and that could go the other way. That would be a big gain. This is looking more like a John Madden thing, I think, here. That would be key for the Republicans. If they could knock off a Democrat, pick up a Democratic seat in Maryland, the other 2 seats that we judged at least possibly in play that could go the other way from Republicans to Democrats are Tennessee and Arizona, which was closing near the end. That would be a surprise, but that would be a very bad night.
So they're going to have to win, what, 4 out of the 6 outstanding and hold Maryland, right?
They need to win, yes, they need to hold Maryland, exactly, this one here, and win 4 of the 6, and the 4 most likely, again, Virginia, Missouri, Rhode Island, Montana.
Right,
and
so the Republicans, if George Allen can hang on and they win Tennessee, and Arizona, where Kyle, although he was a lot closer than Republicans wanted, was ahead, the Republicans could hold the Senate.
Yeah, I don't think we know yet. We have any sense yet
I think
who will win the Senate.
We got a long way to go here.
Absolutely.
On the Senate. Absolutely.
We have a long way to go, but it's worth noting that the conventional wisdom has been for months that maybe the Democrats would take over the House, but there was no way that they were going to go.
Well, that wasn't the conventional wisdom of recent.
Well,
the last
just
month.
at the very end, it became possible to see how they could pick up 6 seats, but most commentators were saying that it was going to be 4, maybe 3, or something like that, and now it's beginning to be quite possible that they're going to take over the Senate as well as the House.
Fred?
Which has been.
Yeah, I don't know why.
I didn't predict it.
Yeah.
Bill did predict it. So Larry Sabato predicted it. Many people have. So but that was a myth.
No, it was not a myth. Believe me, it was not a myth. Practically everybody was saying 2 weeks ago that yes, the House was going to go, but the Senate, it looked like they could hold on to. I'm not saying that they can't, but things have moved in the Democratic
Every
direction.
single Democrat I talked to in recent months said they'd win the House and the Senate.
That's just not so. I mean,
How do you know what the Democrat Fred talked to said?
Fred talks to some pretty weird Democrats. I know. I work with Fred every day. You should see those Democrats he gets on the phone.
Yeah, that's right.
But I mean, if the prospects hold and we see Corker prevail in Tennessee, it really is tough for the Democrats to do it. So it would require, you know, that Webb would win in Virginia, right? It would require that not only Ohio and Pennsylvania go, but Rhode Island, that Montana fit in.
And Missouri.
So I mean,
Missouri.
that we talk about wave elections. That's a tsunami. I mean, if what you're describing comes to pass.
All right, we're waiting here as we discuss all this for 9 o'clock to roll around, which it will in about a minute and 45 seconds here. And at that point, the polls are going to close in a bunch of places, and we may well be in a position to call some of these races. There you see on that board there the long list of states. Now we're out into the Midwest and the Southwest a bit, where polls are going to be closing, and we'll be able to tell you a little bit more about the shape of this race. We are restrained, we should say here, by the fact that the exit poll data is suspect. Once again, it may turn out to be okay, but it was looking like it had a very distinct, once again, a distinct bias toward the Democrats, which burned us in 2000 and burned us a little bit in 2002 and really fried us in 2004, where a lot of us went into election night 2004 as the polls were beginning to close, believing, as John Kerry himself believed, that he had won the election. And in fact, his campaign manager, Bob Strum, turned to him and said, it is now famously known, may I be the first to call you Mr. President? Well, he became the first, and as it turned out, almost the last, because because he didn't become the president, and he's maybe running again, but anyway, we're worried about the exit polls once again. We're trying to extrapolate data from them as best we can. We're scratching our heads over them and trying to use them as best we can. In the meantime, we're relying on the raw vote totals, which are coming in as raw vote totals do, in a somewhat sporadic and in a way that doesn't always afford us the kind of specific data we need upon which to indicate who's won races. Sometimes you can do it right after the polls close in not very close races. And there'll be presumably some of those coming up at 9 o'clock. So we're watching for the 9 o'clock hour to roll around, and we'll take a look at the states where we can at least make some calls. So here we come. 9 o'clock is upon us. So let's look at the states where we can call. You see raw vote on the Allen race at the bottom of the screen. Here we go. This is Ben Nelson. This is a Democrat hold in Nebraska, which is no surprise, no switch. Minnesota Senate. This is a race where the Republicans thought for a long time they had a chance. Mark Kennedy there, but the Democratic candidate, was it Amy Klobuchar? Is that her name? Yeah, has been favored to win on almost all cards of late, and was certainly expected to do so. New York Senate, no surprise there. Hillary Clinton, overwhelming favorite to win, huge lead in the polls. She's won. In Michigan. What is this? Texas Senate. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't see that very well. Kay Bailey Hutchison, overwhelmingly favored to win, and has done so. In fact, she was so overwhelmingly favored that some Republicans were mad at her for not donating more of her campaign money, which was felt she didn't really need, to other Republican candidates who they thought could use it more than she did. Now, North Dakota U.S. Senate. This is Kent Conrad. He's been a senior member on the Budget Committee and well known to those who cover Washington. Was not thought to be in any trouble, and he's not. He wins re-election. New Mexico, Jeff Bingaman, been around a long time, was overwhelmingly favored to win. He has won. In Wyoming, the Senate race there. This is is no surprise that Craig Thomas, who is a conservative, as you might imagine, from the state of Wyoming, was going to be reelected. He didn't have a close race, and as you can see, he's won it. Here's Wisconsin. Herb Kohl. He was not in trouble. He's won. We wish we had the ability to tell you. In Missouri, now, this is one, of course, we're all dying to know about. Only a small fraction of precincts are in even as we speak. The polls have been closed there for a while, and the race is way too close to call. This will be a late one, we fear. And in Tennessee, it's a somewhat similar situation. 10% of the polls are closed. We're not trusting our exit poll sample there, and although Bob Corker appears to have a sizable lead, as only a fraction of the vote is in, and that could still go either way. Connecticut Senate, this is a similar situation. Ned Lamont has been well behind running against Joe Lieberman, who is an incumbent Democrat running as an independent. The Republican Schlesinger has not been a factor in the race. As you can see at 10%, he apparently still is not, but we're not able to make a call there and may not be able to for some time. Similar situation in the state of Virginia. We'd love to be able to tell you something about how that's going to come out. 65% of the precincts are in, but we still can't make a call. Allen is leading by, what, 16,000 votes. That's not enough in a state of that size to make a call. And across the Potomac River in Maryland, we have very little in there, and the Lieutenant Governor Michael Steele, and still too close to call in his race with the Congressman Ben Cardin. Chafee, White House, close race, got very close at the end. White House was thought to have a lead. They are almost indistinguishable on the issues. This is a state in which it said you're an endangered species if you got an R by your name, and Chafee did have an R by his name, and he has been endangered, although he was thought to be making a late surge. Sometimes late surges peter out and don't amount to much. Sometimes they end up being the momentum that carries into Election Day. In the state of Rhode Island, we don't yet know which. We wish we did, but we don't. So we'll ask you to bear with us, folks, as we go through this long list of. Now we got polls closed in a whole bunch of states now. Bill, let's go back to that board you have there, the what we call the power play board, and just review once again. We've seen two Democratic pickups in the Senate, Ohio and Pennsylvania. Neither of them a surprise. Everything else that's out there is still too close to call. Out of the group on the right, the Democrats would need to gain a net of 4 more, and if they lose Maryland, which is in the realm of possibility, they'd need to win 5 out of 6. So they still have some work to do in the Senate. Senator Schumer, you saw exuberant earlier at how well it's going so far, but nonetheless, a lot is still out there. We're not going to know for a while.
Right, and we really won't know for a while. Virginia looks very close on the real vote. I'm sure we won't call that till we get another, huge chunk of vote in. Missouri, we have almost no vote yet, and that one looks close. Rhode Island just closed, and Montana doesn't close till 10 o'clock, and it looks very likely that control of the Senate could well hinge on Montana. So even without surprises in Maryland, Arizona, or even if Corker hangs on to Tennessee, we'll be waiting, I think, on Montana and Missouri probably pretty late into the evening.
Well, it's interesting to get the sense. We got some of it from Senator Schumer there with Senator Reid. Democratic National Chairman Howard Dean is out and has been doing some interviews, and my colleague Chris Wallace is in touch with him now and in a position to talk to him. Chris.
Thank you, Britt. We do want to bring in the former governor of Vermont and the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Governor Dean. Governor Dean, good evening to you, sir.
Chris, thanks for having me on.
As you've seen, we have called so far 2 pickups in the Senate, Ohio and Pennsylvania, Democratic pickups of Republican seats. We have so far 1 pickup of a House seat in Indiana. Are you seeing more gains than that?
No, we're being very conservative, if I may say so, on a conservative station, and very careful because, as your commentators had said, everybody's been burned by exit polls before. We're optimistic because the turnout is so big, and when 2/3 of the American people want to go in a different direction, that's a good thing for the country, and it's also a good thing for the party out of power that offers a different direction. But I agree with you. I think it's going to be a late night, and it could come down to Montana or Missouri.
Let me ask you about, because if it is a Democratic victory, people are going to be wondering what it's a victory for. Some people are saying it's an ideological victory. On the other hand, a number of your candidates, for instance, Bob Casey, the Senate, apparently victorious Senate candidate in Pennsylvania, quite a moderate for a Democrat. Is this a party victory or an ideological victory?
I think it's a victory for a new direction, to be honest with you. I don't think it's, part of it's about the party, but I think that what's happened over the last few years is that the Republicans have lost touch with the American people. The Iraq is, of course, a big issue. Corruption, it turns out, is a huge issue today in the exit polls. It's an issue that we've been harping on for a while. And there's just been an awful lot of it. There's, I think, 4 or 5 Republican congressmen that had to resign, including the majority leader. And the other, of course, issue is the economy. It was an issue that was very frustrating to the president because the corporate earnings are up, the Dow Jones is up, but that's fine for the top 20%. The president's tax cuts were aimed at the top 20%. The rest of the 80% have got some real worries about the economy. The Republicans have cut the ways that middle class and working class kids get to college. Well, people know that that's the ticket to get out of their economic situation. So I think those are the three real pillars: Iraq, economy, and the corruption issue.
But let me ask you, because you say it's a mandate or a vote for a new direction. That obviously is a pretty broad theme. When you say in the economic area, is that a mandate to raise taxes on the rich? In Iraq, is it a mandate for a quicker pullout from Iraq?
Well, I think the answer to your first question is probably not a mandate to raise taxes on the rich. I think it's a mandate to make middle class, to create tax fairness for middle-class people. The upper folks have gotten a big tax break, but middle-class people haven't gotten anything. In fact, they've had some programs that they really rely on cut. That's problem number one. In Iraq, I do think it's a mandate to do something different in Iraq. The president made a big deal of staying the course, but that's not what people want to do. People want to get out of Iraq. They actually want to do what most Democrats want to do. No Democrats are going to rush for the exits in Iraq. We need to stabilize the situation and then leave, but we need to leave, and we need a plan to leave, and I think you'll see one coming forward.
Now, you have taken some heat even within the Democratic Party on your 50-state strategy, that you can no longer be competitive just in blue states, but you have to have a presence, a real competitive presence around the country. When you see Democrats tonight, very competitive in Virginia, competitive, although maybe at this point trailing in Tennessee, and certainly competitive in Montana, do you see that as in some sense an embracing, a vindication of your 50-state strategy?
Well, look, I think there's plenty of credit to go around. Look, Emanuel and Schumer and Pelosi and Reid did a great job recruiting really good candidates. They raised a ton of money and poured it into advertising. But it is true that we expect to do well in red states. And you mentioned the Senate races. I believe we're going to pick up the governorship in Colorado. We could pick up the governorship in Nevada. We're going to pick up 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 seats in Arizona in the Congress. So the answer is the Democratic Party has begun to start the long overdue process of reaching out to people in states that we haven't done so well in for a while and haven't even had a presence in for a while. Now we do have a presence in all these states. And so we've got a ways to go. Look, we can't undo what's happened to us over the last 12 years in just one election cycle. But we're going to build on this. Win or lose tonight, and I don't know if we're going to win or lose, but win or lose tonight, we're going back to work tomorrow and continue what we're doing and reaching out to every single American. One of the things that Nancy Pelosi has said, in addition to raising the minimum wage and passing an ethics bill, is that we're going to be civil again. We're going to reach out to everybody. Unlike the Bush administration, who seemed to think they were only president of half the country, everybody is our boss, including those people who didn't vote for us. And I think it's respectful to ask them for their votes. We know we're not going to get some of those votes early on, but if you keep asking and keep reaching out, then I think we will become the majority party in a more sustained way.
Governor Dean, we want to thank you so much for coming on Fox News. We'll be watching the returns for the rest of the night along with you. Britt, back to you.
All right, Chris, thanks to you, and thanks to Governor Dean. Megan Kendall is standing by with some further word on governorships. Megan?
Hey there, Britt. Yeah, you heard Howard Dean say it. The Democrats are looking to pick up some states in terms of their party, and it turns out they have done it. They've held on to a few states and picked up a few as well. First, out of Arizona, we are now projecting that Governor Janet Napolitano is the winner there, beating out her Republican and independent challengers. In Wyoming, you see it there. Governor Freudenthal, it appears, has won over his Democratic challenger Ray Hunkins. In Texas, Fox News projecting the Republican governor Rick Perry has prevailed not only over Chris Bell, who you see there, but over the independent Kinky Friedman, whose campaign slogan was "Why the hell not?" In New York, Fox News projecting that Eliot Spitzer has won as expected over Republican Faso. This is not a surprise, but it is a turnover. This, of course, a state that was governed by a Republican, George Pataki, he now stepping down. In New Mexico, Fox News projecting a win for Bill Richardson, not a surprise, the Democrat over his challenger John Dendal. In Nebraska, Fox is projecting a win by the sitting Governor Heinemann, the Republican, over David Hahn. In Ohio, as you've been discussing, Fox News has projected a win for Ted Strickland over Ken Blackwell. This will be the first time in 20 years a Democrat has sat in the Ohio governor's seat. And in Oklahoma, you see it there, a Democrat, Brad Henry, the governor, prevailing over Ernest Istook. So in all, right there, the most exciting news was the Ohio win, of course, for Ted Strickland that Fox News has projected, and New York. Those are 2 turnovers from red to blue. If you include Massachusetts as well, that's yet another state in which there was a Republican governor, Mitt Romney, that now Fox News is projecting will turn blue. Deval Patrick is the projected winner in that state, as we announced earlier. So there you have it, Brett. At least 3 major state turnovers from red to blue tonight.
But correct me if I'm wrong, none of those is actually a surprise, right?
Nope.
These were basically the expected.
Not a one. All of those Democrats were polling at least double points ahead of their challengers.
All right, Megan Kendall, great as always. Thank you very much. We're going to take a brief break here. Back with more in a moment. Stay tuned. We are now projecting that Senator Lieberman will be reelected as an independent. Now, that's going down on this. We've got a little gizmo on there that says it's a gain. Well, it's a gain if you believe that the independent caucus in the Senate will now have 1 more member than it had before. Presumably, you'd also believe that Bernie Sanders and Joe Lieberman would get together and be the independent caucus. But Lieberman has said he will caucus with the Democrats, as everybody expects he will. So this is really not a gain for the independents or a loss for the Democrats and Republicans. It is a hold of a seat held by a Democrat, although he has been a particularly interesting kind of Democrat, one who not so many months ago, when he lost his party's nomination for Senate, based largely on a protest vote against the war in favor of Ned Lamont, that is something we're looking at. We didn't expect that to change, and it didn't change. In the meantime, my colleague Chris Wallace has been joined by another guest, the counterpart of Howard Dean, Ken Mehlman. Chris?
Exactly right, Brett. In the interest of being fair and balanced, as always, we bring in the chairman of the Republican National Committee, Ken Mehlman. And Mr. Mehlman, good evening.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We, as I said with Howard Dean, at this point we show 2 Senate seat pickups for the Democrats in Ohio and Pennsylvania, 1 House pickup in Indiana. Do you see anything more out there switching from either Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican?
Well, it's very interesting right now. If you look around the country, there are a number of different races that appear to be telling different signals. There's some evidence in Maryland that Michael Steele did historically well in the African-American community. They'll not only be important in that race, it'll be important potentially nationally. The Virginia number's incredibly close. If you look, what's interesting, a significant portion of Northern Virginia is in. Allen appears to be holding on. Ann North is in a very tough race. On the other hand, Jeff Davis is in a place right now. A lot of people expected that to be the closest race in Kentucky, and he's winning big time. He may have already declared victory. So what we really are looking at, we projected about 30 races that would be very close. A lot of it looks like it's a race-by-race decision, which means if you've got viewers watching where the polls are still open, it's very important that they go out and vote.
So you're not prepared at this point to say that you're going to lose the House, let alone the Senate?
Absolutely not. What's interesting to me right now, if you look at the data, is Virginia's very close, Maryland's very close, Missouri looks very close, not a lot of data back from Montana, and all of those are indicative of what's going to be, as we predicted, a very long and interesting evening. So what I would say to folks is grab a bag of pretzels, grab a cold one. It's going to be a long evening.
Governor Dean said that he thinks that this election shows already a mandate for change, especially on Iraq policy, especially on economic policy. Your response?
I think Governor Dean would have that finding no matter what the results were tonight. Let's see what the people say. Let's see what the voters say. Obviously, I think no matter what the outcome, there are areas where we can work together on a bipartisan basis. I've always believed no matter what the election, when you win big or whatever happens, it's always important to look in the mirror and say, what do we do better? How do we do a better job? But to declare based on some early numbers, when particularly as many districts appear close as this one, that there's some kind of national trend, I think is premature.
Let me ask you, though, because you just brought up an area where you do agree with Governor Dean. He talked about a desire among the public for a new civility, for the parties working more closely together than they have in the past. Are the Republicans, and especially is the Bush White House, willing to take up its side of the bargain on that area?
Absolutely, and I think if you look over the period, some of the most important reforms we've made have been bipartisan, whether it's the education reform, the first piece of legislation the president put forward, legislation like the Patriot Act. The war in Iraq was bipartisan. People on both sides recognized the threat that Saddam Hussein posed. You look at the tax relief, that was bipartisan. Litigation reform has been bipartisan. The energy reform has been bipartisan. I absolutely believe there's an opportunity. I hope if Mr. Dean is serious about what he's saying, then he'll recognize that when people disagree with him, they may not be brain dead. They may not be people that are worth hating, but rather simply people who are good people, which I think about him, who just happen to disagree on the issues.
You know, it's interesting. I certainly agree with you that the exit polls indicate a lot of these races are too close to call. But in the most of the states that we have looked at, there is a majority that seems to disapprove of the way the president is handling his job, and a majority disapproves of the war in Iraq. How much headwind has that created for Republican candidates in this election?
Again, I think we need to look at the specific races. There'll be plenty of time to analyze that kind of data. Look, the president has made clear that this war in Iraq is very frustrating to him, and it's to millions of Americans frustrating. It's very hard to face an enemy that is a movement as opposed to a nation, because a movement is much harder to defeat. When you decapitate the military leadership of a nation, then you eliminate command and control. When an enemy can figure out how to build an IED or recruit new terrorists on a website, it's much harder to deal with. And that's why we have to constantly evolve, constantly adjust. And the fact that people on both sides of the aisles are going to recommend ways to do that is a good thing for America.
Finally, there was a lot of talk before the election about the vaunted 72-hour program, the amazing Rove Melman Get Out the Vote operation. How have you done so far tonight in terms of that? And do you have any excuses? Did anything go wrong in your Get Out the Vote effort?
I'm sure there are things that on the 72-hour we can do better. After the 2004 election, Chris, we did an incredibly intensive after-action review and figured out how we would do better. I'll tell you this. We know this. Millions of people around the country made tens of millions of calls to help turn the vote out. We saw a level of absentee ballot and early voting in a number of states that could end up saving seats. In Kentucky, in Florida, in Arizona, in Tennessee, in Virginia, in a number of these states, our numbers in absentee and early voting exceeded our numbers in the population. So I think there's a huge opportunity both to look at how we can do it better, but once again what this proves is the power of people. It proves that neighbors talking to neighbors is an incredibly effective way, even in a tough environment like this, to help spread the word.
Ken Melman, we want to thank you so much for coming on. We'll see how the world turns as the evening continues.
We'll talk to you later.
Thanks so much. Britt, back to you.
Okay, now we've heard from both the chairmen, both of them being very calm and cautious. Ken Melman seeming, well, he had a lot of smiles. Howard Dean was being, I think, deliberately very subdued. I think, however, he'd be less subdued if he saw this, which is we are now going to project that although he's trailing now with only a little bit of vote in, that the Congressman Ben Cardin will hold that Maryland seat, which has been a Democratic seat for the Democrats, over his challenger, the Lieutenant Governor Michael Steele, who ran what I think most people consider to be was a quite effective campaign in an awfully tough year for a Republican challenger in the state as blue as the state of Maryland is. So that is an important development. One of the first big, well, I won't call it a surprise, but it is one of the first real toss-up races that the really close ones that we've been able to call. We're going to take a break here. We'll be back with more on the other side. Stay tuned. Political achievement in a year that is so lean toward the Democrats. He did not, however, and we are projecting Ben Cardin the winner. We've also called Connecticut for Joe Lieberman. No surprise there. In the meantime, let's check in with Michael Barone down by our decision desk for some further word on his thinking. Michael?
Well, Britt, I'm here to talk to you about the decision desk people have made a determination that we are not going to be relying on exit poll information anymore in projecting the race. What they've done is, through the EMR organization, they've gone back and looked at the actual returns in the precincts where the samples of exiting voters were taken by interviewers. What they found was a 6 to 8 point Democratic bias. That is to say, the exit poll turned out to be 6 to 8% more Democratic than did the vote in the actual precinct when that vote was tallied. So. And sometimes the error is a little more, sometimes the error is a little less. They felt these numbers were unreliable enough that we're not going to deal with them. We're going to be looking at the tabulated vote and making assessments therefrom.
All right, Michael, thank you. We're keeping an eye here, of course, on not only the calls that we're making, but the calls that some others are making as well. And we had a couple we can make right now. Let's take a look here. First of all, Indiana. We're now projecting that the Democrat there will win that race. So that's incumbent Congressman Chris Chicola, who had been able to succeed there. This is a race that the Republicans very much thought that they would be able to win. Joe Donnelly, I believe his name is, who has won that race now. That is a net gain of one for the Democrat. And in Kentucky, we are also making a projection there that Ann Northup, after a number of years in a blue district, will not be reelected, that her Democratic challenger there has won. And this now gives us a little more to talk about in terms of the direction of things in the House of Representatives. Bill, as we look at this now in the House, I think it's fair to say that we're beginning to see the early outlines of what could be a trend.
We are, and it's happening where people expected it to happen. Indiana, Kentucky, and Northup's district, which Kerry carried in a tight race. Ohio, Fred wrote an excellent piece in the Weekly Standard on what they were calling a couple of weeks ago the possible blowout belt.
That's what I was calling it.
No, you invented that term? I don't know.
I did. Yes, I did.
Okay. Well,
now let's looking on the screen now, Bill, you can see now that if you project the loss of 3 of the Republicans, the House, if they had to seat it tonight, would be the new House would be 229 to 205. A long way to go, but you can see it's already. We can see there, at least graphically, what a difference it makes. One independent still sitting there.
But I think there will be more than 3. There's no question. I mean, we've seen the beginning of it, and we just don't know how big it will be. A lot will depend on what happens out west. I mean, there's a lot of seats, about 20, 25 seats in the Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Connecticut belt that Fred dubbed the blowout belt. A good chunk of those could go Democratic. Then there are random sort of seats in Arizona and elsewhere. Wyoming's one at large seat. If those start to go, then we're talking 35 or 40.
And the other thing is, of course, we're waiting. We'll be looking for results in New York State,
right,
where there are some endangered Republicans there, and where the word that was being heard, Major Garrett was picking up soundings from some Republican sources that were saying that Hillary Clinton's get out the vote operation for a race that she was in no danger of losing seemed to be making a difference in the turnout for other races there, which of course could only help the Democrats.
Britt, if you add in Pennsylvania, where Republicans may lose 3 seats, New York, where they could lose anywhere from 1 to 5, but probably something like 1 or 2, and then we don't know the 3 endangered Connecticut House seats. Right. 3 Republican seats, all in jeopardy of losing. So I think Democrats have, it's almost, I mean, it's a chip shot to win the House.
In addition to which, there's Ohio, where the Bob Ney seat, I believe, is already gone, that open seat. We've got Steve
You believe
Chabot.
it's gone because you think it's going to go. We haven't called it.
Well, if we haven't called it, the Democrats were, both parties were saying that they thought that the Ney seat was going to go beforehand, and it probably is. Then you have actually 3 other seats in Ohio that are vulnerable, including Gene Schmidt, who was the person who criticized Jack Murtha after he came out with this proposal to withdraw from begin Iraq withdrawals, and she, on the floor, read a letter accusing him of cowardice from another Marine, and had to apologize.
She had her words
for it.
taken down, as
Yes,
they say in
exactly.
the House, where you basically have to formally eat your words.
That is a very, very Republican district that she's in, and she's in trouble too. So there could be a 4-seat loss in Ohio. That would be big.
Yeah, this afternoon I was talking to Republicans. Here's their take was, look, you know what? That Northeast that Howard Dean and others were counting on as their stronghold in an attempt to take over the House, they saw that was fading. They thought there was a chance that Republicans would hold on people like Chris Shays in Connecticut. But what we're seeing early on indicates that in the Republican area, where Republicans should have done better in Indiana, should have done better with Northup, you would think, in Kentucky, that it's the Republicans who are on the rope at this moment. And again, it looks like this is the start of what will push towards a Democratic.
And we have one more call we're able to make. This in Rhode Island, where Link Chafee, the incumbent Republican, has lost, we project, to the Democratic candidate Sheldon Whitehouse, 2 men whose views are virtually indistinguishable, but nonetheless, in a state like Rhode Island, in a year like this, with an R next to your name, you're endangered, and so Chafee proved to be endangered. We're going to take a brief break. We're going to take a look at how this alters the structure in terms of who's up, who's down in the House and in the Senate when we come back. Stay tuned. let's turn quickly to my colleague Megan Kendall for more on the governor's races. Megan?
Hi there, Britt. Yeah, we have a couple of interesting updates for you now. The first one out of Wisconsin. This is, Fox News is projecting a Democratic hold. You can see that Governor Jim Doyle, we are projecting now, has prevailed over his challenger, Mark Green. This was a tight race. This one was one of the toss-ups, according to the experts. The Republicans very much wanted to capture this seat from the incumbent. At Fox News now projecting they have failed to do so. The Governor, Jim Doyle, holding on. In South Carolina, Fox News projecting now Governor Mark Sanford has prevailed over Democratic challenger Tommy Moore. Of course, we pointed out earlier Mark Sanford had trouble voting today. He also, Britt, burned his eyes on television lights yesterday, burning his cornea. So Governor Sanford, if you're listening, Fox News projecting good news for you tonight. In Vermont, Governor Jim Douglas, the Republican, Fox News projecting, has prevailed over his Democratic challenger Scudder Parker. This too, not really a big surprise. He was expected to hold this state. And finally, in Maine, Fox is projecting that Governor John Baldacci has prevailed over his Republican challenger, Chandler Woodcock. That, again, not a surprise, although Woodcock, quite conservative in Maine, had the support of the two more moderate Republican senators, didn't manage to pull it out there. Again, not a huge surprise. So that's the latest from here, Britt, on the governor's races.
All right, Megan, thanks very much. Let me turn to my colleague Bill Kristol now, who can show us graphically, at least, what has happened in terms of the Senate. Bill?
Well, Britt, if I'm not mistaken, there were 15 Democratic seats up this year, and they have held them all. No Democratic seat will go Republican, and Maryland is the last one we've called. So Maryland and New Jersey were the two that seemed at risk. They are staying Democratic. There were 18 Republican seats up this year. So far, with calling Rhode Island, 3 Republican incumbents. Let me just do this correctly here so I can move this little guy over here. There we go. 3 Republican incumbents have lost. Chafee in Rhode Island, DeWine in Ohio, Santorum in Pennsylvania. The 3 Republican incumbents next at risk would seem to be Allen in Virginia, but that race seems just dead even as we see the popular vote accumulate. That was another one where the original exit polls seem to have been way off.
That's beginning to look like it's going to be a late night on that.
That could be a late night in Virginia. Missouri, early count, looks very close. In Montana, the polls haven't even closed. Tennessee, which has been a close race, Corker seems to have a lead in the raw vote, but no one's calling that either. So the Democrats need 3 more seats. They've held all their seats. Virginia, Missouri, Montana. Held all their seats so far.
Well,
and
none of the others was thought in danger. In fact, we're in a position now to call a couple of the races. There are no surprises in either of these. First, let's look at, well, what do we got here first? We got, there you go, Michigan. Debbie Stabenow reelected over, now that's a candidate that was thought to have been making a late charge. Now that, pay no attention to that margin there. That's just based on the tabulation that's in so far. But Debbie Stabenow, a winner there. She's was a first termer, so this is, and in Delaware, this is no great surprise either that Tom Carper, the incumbent there, has won out as well. He was never thought to be in any jeopardy. He a winner as well. That furthers, however, Bill, your theme that Democrats do not appear tonight to be on the verge of losing a single seat they now hold to a Republican, which means that Republicans are going to just have to hang on like crazy to what they need 2 or 3 of the remaining the 5 that are still out there that were thought to be the close ones. Let's go to that board again if we can.
of the 5 Republican seats that are at risk, the Democrats need to win 3 to take the. Whoever wins 3 controls the Senate.
Okay.
3 out of 5.
3 out of 5.
3 out of 5. Tennessee, Arizona, Montana, Missouri, Virginia. And that will be, I think, the big story of tonight, because the Democrats look likely, well, look as if they're going to win the House. The margin is a question.
And they have looked for some days as if they were going to win the House. In fact, this morning I looked at all the projections of, 5 of the major prognosticators, including our own Michael Verone and our own Robert Novak, and every single one of them had, by one degree or another, the Republicans getting control of the House. They were all over the place on the Senate, anywhere from 2 to 7 or 8. So. This may be why the Republicans still think they have potentially something to cheer about tonight. It might be considered a very major kind of a moral victory and a major hold if they can keep the Senate. Let's go down to the White House and see what the sentiment is there tonight from my colleague, our chief White House correspondent, Brett Baer. Hi, Brett.
Hi, Brett. The President and the First Lady and his chief political advisor, Karl Rove, watching the returns in the White House residence tonight. You'll not be surprised to hear that senior Bush aides say the mood is generally upbeat. They believe the exit polls reminded them of 2004 and that they were out of line. However, that was before the latest calls. Senior aides were really watching that Indiana race, that House race, Chris Chicola, that you just called for Joe Donnelly. They were watching watching that race as well as a number of other House races. The president went on a 11-state tour over the past 9 days, trying to rally the base. And two of the places that he thought Republicans, and the White House believes Republicans still have a chance to pick up Democrat seats, are in Georgia. Georgia 12, former Congressman Max Burns against John Barrow. That race they are watching very closely, and I think we might have the current numbers. Still too close to call, but there you have 55%, 45%. The other race in Georgia is Georgia 8, Mac Collins against Representative Jim Marshall. Again, that is another race that the White House is watching, possibly a Republican pickup, but there you see, again, too close to call, 50% each. The White House, as far as the Senate calls, saying that nothing is too shocking yet, but that again was before the Maryland call was made. So they're watching cautiously. I can tell you senior staff just ordered chicken tenders. They think it's going to be a long night.
Okay, maybe some coffee as well. All right, Brett, thanks very much. We're going to check in now to see what is being said about all this in the blogosphere with our colleague, Michelle. How are you doing? Tell us what you got.
Doing good here, Brett. And the blogosphere, which really made a name for itself, challenging the mainstream media's reporting. You remember Rathergate and a lot of the blogosphere coverage during the 2004 election campaign is not resting on its laurels. And of course tonight you've got a lot of grievances, mostly from the right side of the blogosphere, over the leak of exit polls and also what they consider the premature calling of a lot of these races. At newsbusters.org, which is one of the leading mainstream media critic blogs, they've been highlighting the early calls in Pennsylvania. And you've also got an alliance of bloggers in Ohio who have pointed out that there was at least one polling location that was still open at the time that that race was called. So you'll be hearing a lot of grievances on that front. On another note, it's interesting that after Harry Reid appeared with Charlie Schumer, and we showed it here on Fox News over the past hour, that you have a lot of fissures between liberal bloggers and the Democrat Party now showing. Those cracks are really coming to the fore, particularly after the loss of Ned Lamont, who was really the first YouTube candidate, a blogger-supported candidate who lost. And there's a lot of cannibalism now within the Democrat Party and among liberals over that, and we're seeing that in the blogosphere, Brett.
Okay, Michelle, that's interesting. I suppose before the night is over, we may come in for some criticism because we called the race in Ohio while there were still some polls open by court order out there. Only, 16 or so, but I suppose that could bring us in for some criticism from the people at Newsbusters or probably somewhere else as well. We have a call we're now going to make in a House race in Florida. Now, Buchanan is the Republican. We project he was thought to be in some difficulty there. We thought he might, that's Florida 13, but it appears that we are now projecting that he will win that race, which is a hold for a Republican in one of those places where on a big night for the Democrats he might have gone. So that is, now I'm correct that we're calling this, correct? Okay, I just didn't see the fabled check mark, so I'll look forward to seeing that appear on the screen. We're going to take a break. Maybe we can get our check mark up in the meantime. Stay tuned.
That's Catherine Harris.
Welcome back, folks, and we continue with our coverage now of some more governor's races coming in by the minute. Fox News is now able to project a winner in the state of Michigan. It looks like Governor Jennifer Granholm will hold on to her seat, beating back a challenge by Dick DeVos. This was one the Republicans really wanted, didn't know if they could win, but were giving it the old college try. And in Maryland, huge news. Fox News projecting that the governor, Bob Ehrlich, the Republican governor, has been ousted, that Baltimore Mayor O'Malley has won that seat, and O'Malley will head from Baltimore now, becoming the governor, the 61st governor of the state of Maryland. That is a big one. In the state of Kansas, Fox News projecting that Governor Kathleen Sebelius will hold her seat, beating back a challenge from Republican Jim Barnett. Not a huge surprise there. Illegal immigration an issue in that race. And finally, Fox News is projecting in Alabama a win for Governor Bob Riley. over his Democratic challenger. That, too, not a big surprise. But, of course, the big news now in this hour is the win in Maryland for Mayor O'Malley. It's interesting because the sitting governor, Bob Ehrlich, had said, he's a Republican, that if Lieutenant Governor Michael Steele lost his bid for the Senate, he would go down as well. Ehrlich would go down as well. As it turns out, his prediction was correct. Fox News has predicted both of those men have lost their races on this Tuesday night. Britt?
Okay, Megan, thanks very much. Worth commenting, this Ehrlich race. Ehrlich was a Republican in a Democratic state, but it had been thought, I think widely thought, that he had been an effective and successful governor. He's an attractive guy, youthful guy. Is this just a case of having the wrong letter next to his name?
Largely.
Collateral damage, really?
He had very good approval ratings.
Over 60%.
He even got the Washington Post endorsement, which means a lot in the suburbs. He was very appealing. He's pro-choice, or at least not. Yeah, he is. I guess he defined himself as pro-choice. He's pro-stem cell research, unlike Michael Steele, and had some appeal in the close-in suburbs, but it wasn't enough. This is just.
Now, is it fair to say that this is? I mean, you know, we always say that House races tend to be, and Senate races as well, tend in off-year elections, particularly House races, tend to be settled on local issues. Is this a race that got so? This whole overall race got so nationalized that we can say that Bob Ehrlich was affected by Iraq?
Well, O'Malley, the winner, actually ran ads linking Ehrlich to George Bush. I mean, utterly.
Well, who knows what worked? Bill, your thoughts?
And obviously the governor's races can separate more from the national trend, and there are Republican governors who will end up winning in blue states and vice versa. But it is striking to me, just looking at the results we have in now, how much being in a blue state, in a Democratic state, is hurting Republicans this year. The place Republicans seem to be hanging on, we just called Florida 13. Catherine Harris's district, Buchanan has been behind there throughout almost the whole race. It's next door to Foley's district. There was a lot of talk about how the Foley scandal would hurt there. Ultimately, though, Florida remains a pretty Republican state, and that's a Republican district, and it came home for the Republicans. At Georgia, these two Democratic congressmen, the only two Democratic congressmen it looks like who are endangered, are in Georgia, a very Republican state where a Republican governor got reelected easily, that Bush carried obviously very easily. It strikes me that we have had a nationalized election, and the Republicans who are going down in Democratic states.
Let's go back to one of the common descriptions I heard when you go out and cover politics this year about Republicans is a good Republican candidate, bad Republican year. A perfect description of Bob Ehrlich, the governor of Maryland.
I thought a terrific governor. And one would have to say Michael Steele as well.
Indeed.
Absolutely. I think they both ran good campaigns. Now, Ehrlich, you got to remember, Ehrlich defeated Kathleen Townsend Kennedy after Glendening, who was a popular, at least for most of his time, popular Democratic governor of Maryland, left. And the reason that Ehrlich was able to do that was the sentiment that it's time for reform, time for change. And he was popular, and yet here you get O'Malley bringing the strength of a Democratic Party machine in Baltimore City and relying on the African-American vote in Prince George's County to triumph. Just in the last few days, you've had Barack Obama and Bill Clinton go into that state to try to rouse the Democratic vote. That's the importance that Democrats had put on that race toward the end, and it looks like it's paid off for them.
All right, Bill, give us a look now at the balance of power as it now stands. On that, this is of course in the House. We haven't used this one before. We're going to need to lose that ticker at the bottom of the screen. So we're going to do the Senate. Okay, go ahead, Bill. Do the Senate for us.
Well, let's do the Senate first. It hasn't changed. Again, I'm so struck. Look at the Senate seats that are that the Republicans need to hold. Virginia, a mildly Republican state. Missouri, a mildly Republican state, very mildly Republican state.
Yeah, much more mild in Virginia.
Right. Tennessee, Arizona, Montana, pretty Republican states. Montana, Senator Burns thought, though, to be in very serious trouble. They really need to win Tennessee and Arizona, but then really it'll be very interesting to see what happens in Virginia and Missouri.
All right, good. Now let's look at the House if we can. Your screen real estate, there you got more room there. Yeah, good.
I haven't moved all these House seats. What this, I think, screen shows most interestingly is how few Democratic House seats were at risk. This isn't just Democratic incumbents. These are Democratic-held House seats.
And some of those have shifted, though, right?
Right. Well, yeah, some of these in here.
Indiana, too. You got a bunch of them to move. Indiana 8's going to come over, right?
Indiana 8 should go over there. and Florida 13 stays, which I think is interesting. That we thought that was one of the ones most at risk. It's why we had it in this
Kentucky
group.
3 needs to move over. I don't know that's on your screen there.
No, it's not on the screen. We can move it onto the screen. Florida 13 we thought was one of the ones most at risk. That is held. Several of these other ones.
And of course, that's not an incumbent either. I mean, that's Catherine Harris's old seat,
I would predict instantly that incumbency, we hear so much, incumbency so strong, incumbency so strong. Incumbency will be less of a factor this year, I think, than ideology. That is, being an open seat in a conservative area, Florida 13, you're better off than being a popular incumbent, a strong incumbent like a Chris Shays in Connecticut, who's not in a Republican or conservative state.
And now the balance of power has shifted just a little bit further, 229-205, because, well, it hasn't shifted further, I should say, because we predicted Vern Buchanan will hold on there. And let's get a little bit more about that district and that race and what it may portend from our colleague Michael Barone down at the decision desk. Michael?
Well, Britt, one of the interesting things about that race was that it broke down as a sort of fight between two big coastal counties on the district, Manatee County, which the major cities are Bradenton, and Sarasota County, major city is Sarasota. Sarasota is sort of more upscale. You get people moved down there from kind of the tonier Midwestern suburbs and so forth. Bradenton is a little more mixed group, working class. There's Walmarts there and that sort of thing. And what's interesting in this race is that it was the Republican Vern Buchanan who carried Manatee County and who carried the several interior counties of Florida, the areas that voted historically Democratic for many years, switched to the Republicans in the 80s and 90s. And it was the Democrat, Christine Jennings, a former Republican herself, who carried Sarasota County. Buchanan got enough votes in Manatee and the two other counties to win. So it's sort of a reversal of the old politics of the New Deal period, when it was assumed that the sort of rich and socially famous socially tony people were Republicans and the common folk were people more like the common folk were Democrats. Kind of a reversal. I also want to take a quick look at Florida 16. The numbers there right now suggest that it's possible, not for sure, but possible that Mark Foley could still win. Formally, actually, of course, that vote for Mark Foley is a vote for State Representative Joe Negron. And one of the reasons is that Martin County, the most Republican county there, still has 60% of the votes out. And if those go the way the other Repub votes go, Repubs may hold on to this scandal-endangered seat.
Very interesting. Let me ask you one question about the Buchanan race. Is that a race that was thought sufficiently endangered that the fact that the Republicans are holding it could tell us something more about A, the rest of Florida, and B, perhaps the rest of the country, or not?
Yeah, I think so. President Bush went down there. This was one in trouble. Jennings seemed to be ahead in the polls. Buchanan seems to have pulled it out.
All right, because Michael, thank you. The assignment at the moment for the Republicans would seem to be to hold on to the Senate if they possibly can, and contain their House losses as best they can, knowing, as I'm sure they must feel now, that the House is going to end up Democratic tonight, but perhaps not the Senate and perhaps not the House by so big a margin. We don't know yet. That's the story we'll be watching, and we'll take a break and be right back with it.
Welcome back, everybody. Well, it is good news for Republicans in the state of Florida right now. Fox News can now project the winner in that governor's race will be Charlie Crist. This was a hard-fought battle to replace Jeb Bush, who is retiring because of term limits. It does appear at this hour that Charlie Crist will take over the seat. The Republicans will not lose that state house, as was feared as recently as yesterday. Crist was ahead by only 7 percentage points. This must be a relief to him. It does appear that he has retained the Republican seat in that state. In South Dakota as well, Fox is projecting a win for the Republicans. Governor Mike Rounds will retain his seat, we project, over his Democratic challenger. Mike Rounds, you may recall, is the governor who signed that bill banning abortion in virtually all cases except to save the life of the mother. He's very popular in that state. Not a huge surprise that he would prevail tonight. So how do things stand tonight? Let's take a look at the map. 36 states were up for vote in terms of the governorships. We are now projecting change in terms of a shift in power in 4 of those states. The biggest and perhaps the most significant thus far is the state of Maryland, where we are projecting that Governor Ehrlich has been ousted by Baltimore Mayor Democrat Martin O'Malley. Also in the state of Massachusetts, an expected shift. Deval Patrick will now become the nation's second black governor. First ever for Massachusetts. He prevailed over his Democratic challengers and will replace a Republican Mitt Romney there. In Ohio, Ted Strickland, the projected winner, beating down Ken Blackwell, who is the Republican challenger, and replacing a Republican. And then finally in the state of New York, Fox has already projected a big win as expected for Eliot Spitzer, a Democrat who has prevailed over his Republican challenger, Joe Faso. That not a surprise. So perhaps, again, the biggest news out of Maryland. But Florida must come as a big relief to the Republicans, who very much wanted to hold on to that seat, and now it appears they have. Britt?
And Megan, of course, as we noted earlier, the president went down there to campaign for Charlie Crist, among others, and Crist decided not to attend the rally. He was needed elsewhere in the state, and I guess he can say that his strategy worked. And I'm sure the president can say, yeah, but I helped. So, so there you have it. Of course, that's a state where the politics has been dominated to some extent for many years by the president's brother, Jeb. Thanks, Megan, very much. We got a quick call we can give you here in the state of Virginia, in West Virginia, excuse me. This isn't a big surprise that the Democrat Alan Mollahan has held on to his seat. He had a little ethical mini flap that dusted up, and he was at that point the ranking Democrat on the ethics committee, and it caused him a little bit of a headache, and the Democrats ushered him off of that panel presently. And but he was never in great doubt for re-election, but there he is, re-elected. So Alan Mollahan, welcome back to Washington. And let's discuss for a moment here. Bill, give us a sense, if you can, from that wonderful telestrator you have there, the screenwriter, what the situation looks like in the House, if you can. You've had a chance to update that a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. The two Democratic seats that are possible pickups, Georgia 8 and Georgia 12, are just too close to call. It looks like, well, they're just very, very close, within about 1,000 votes. Each of them, Republicans would love to pick up, at least knock off one Democratic incumbent. In 1994, one of the great Republican sort of points to chortle about afterwards was that no Republican incumbent lost in the Senate, the House, or the governorships. I think the Republicans are in danger of having that reversed this year. It's not clear any Democratic seat is going to go Republican. None will in the Senate. I think we can say with confidence. I don't believe any Democratic governorship is going to go to the Republicans.
But they could get a couple out of Georgia.
But they could get these two Georgia House seats. That will be interesting. And then I think the Florida seats, the fact that the Republicans have won Florida 13 here, which was really at risk. He was way behind Buchanan, or well behind earlier, about a month ago. And then these two in Florida 16, Florida 22, which one is Foley's district, which was written off right away. This is a typical case, if I could say, where conventional wisdom just goes wrong. You know, they assume voters are so stupid. Foley gets ousted in a scandal. His name's still on the ballot, and people say, well, he couldn't possibly win. The substitute candidate couldn't possibly win because the voters have to be smart enough to know that they have to punch Foley's name, but they're really voting for Negron.
Well, actually, or check Foley's name or cast. But some clever Republican strategist thought of a slogan, punch Foley to elect Joe, right?
To elect Joe.
Elect Negron, right?
And Negron's a popular, I think, state senator or state assemblyman, well known. And that they educated the voters well, and it looks again, but again, it shows how important I think ideology is, or beliefs. You know, it's a conservative district. The voters wanted to elect a Republican, and they seem to have found their way. They may have found their way to doing so, despite this obstacle.
It's a huge. You would have to consider them just in the political experience a huge obstacle. In about 10 seconds here, we're going to be able to make some calls in states where, at least in one state where the polls are closing. You can see Iowa, and then 3 of those Mountain West states are going to be closing, and have now done so. So let's take a look at the great state of Utah, where we are able to project now, and this is going to come as a surprise to absolutely no one, except those who weren't aware that he was up for re-election, because he was never in any trouble, that veteran Republican Senator Orrin Hatch has been re-elected. No surprise there. Thank you very much. Missouri, well, we're watching this one carefully. These 3 races I'm going to talk about now. Missouri, where we're saying that is still too close to call. McCaskill ahead, but it's just not enough to go on in a great big state like that. Also Tennessee, similarly, although Bob Corker has been ahead. He's ahead now. There seems a significant chance that he will win, but it is still too close to call. We're not able to project it, not least because we don't trust our exit polls. And in Virginia, we have a similar situation, although this race is really tight. You can see they're 85% of the precincts in, and Allen is ahead by 29,000 votes. 29,000 votes can shift in just a couple of counties in a state the size of Virginia if they're in the most densely populated. So we're not in a position to call that. That is really, if you're looking at a pivotal race right now, it might be able to be called sometime in the next hour or so. That would be the one. I think we're going to be here awfully late on Missouri, and possibly on Tennessee as well. And those three will tell the tale of whether the Republicans can hold the Senate or whether the Democrats will, as many of them believe that they were in a position to do, get control of the place. And that'll be the big story for the rest of this night as we watch it go forward. Fred.
Britt, we haven't commented on this effort by Republicans in nominating African Americans for top positions on the ballot. You know, the criticism of Republicans had always been that they were willing to nominate a black, but it was always in a race that was not winnable. Well, this time they nominated Lynn Swann for governor of Pennsylvania, Ken Blackwell for governor of Ohio, and probably most important of all, Michael Steele for the Senate seat in Maryland. They have all failed.
Let me interrupt you for a second, Fred, because we're going to get a look at how things are going tonight out in Missouri. Jim Talent, the incumbent Republican, is speaking to followers there at his headquarters. Let's listen.
Lovely lady on my right, your left, Katie Lyons, Brenda's mom, my mother-in-law, without whom our family could not function. Thank you, Mom. And then Kate and Chrissy, our two daughters, who cleared. It was kind of them to clear their social calendars so they could be with us this evening. And then my son Mike, whose school is playing their first postseason football game this year tomorrow night. And folks, I'm going to be there. What do you think about that? And then my wife Brenda, and I heard Senator Bond say that she's a better campaigner than I am. And of course he's right. And
okay, well, you get a sense of it. He doesn't have anything much to say, really. He's introducing his family to the appreciative Talent followers there, including his son, who's got the postseason game tomorrow night. We'll try, folks, to keep you abreast of those results as well. And if Young Talent's team wins, we'll be sure to tell you. And if not, well, we'll tell you that, too. In the meantime, we got a call to make. This is an important one in Connecticut. Nancy Johnson, veteran incumbent Republican, has lost to Chris Murphy there. This was a seat that was thought that she could hold on to. This is one of those states that is not a good state for George Bush, but it is one in which Nancy Johnson had been able to succeed in a variety of political climates over a number of years, and she did not prevail. This is a pickup for the Democrats and possibly a turning point. Let's go to my colleague Major Garrett, who's been following all the House races down in Washington. Major, your thoughts?
Well, Britt, Connecticut is a big problem for House Republicans, and I can tell you that in my conversations via email in the last hour, I've talked via email to 4 senior Republican strategists, all who work for senior House Republicans, and I've gotten these estimates from them about how many seats Republicans will lose: 20, 23, 25, and 30. All well above the 15-seat threshold necessary for Democrats to regain control of the House for the first time since 1994. And Nancy Johnson's race is one of the reasons why. Nancy Johnson is in her 12th term in Congress, a very respected, moderate Republican, very experienced on tax, trade, and health policy. She ran locally. She did all the things in the Republican playbook to try to withstand this anti-Bush, anti-Republican climate because of the war, because of health care, because of the economy. It didn't work. There are a couple of other Connecticut seats still in jeopardy, a couple of other New Hampshire seats in jeopardy, Pennsylvania, New York. In the entire Northeast, Republicans are seeing a lot of problems with the underlying turnout numbers and early vote totals. They're very concerned about that, and if there's a wave in the Northeast, Republicans fear it could spread to the Midwest and to the West. But right now, Republicans very glum about their prospects of holding the House. Their only remaining hope, Britt, is that the losses are in the low 20s, not the high 30s. Back
okay,
to you,
Major,
New York.
very useful, very good information. Thank you very much. And your colleague Carl Cameron is there in Washington as well with some thoughts about a key Senate race. Carl?
Well, Brett, we're still waiting on the beginnings of the returns to come out of Montana, a very early part of that night out there in the Northwest. That's a race that Conrad Burns had managed to close the gap in the final few days, and there's really a very difficult way of assessing this because Democrat John Tester did so much work with the early voting when Democrats out there. Republicans believe that that one's going to go quite late in the evening as well, not the least of which is because of the time zone problems. And if Conrad Burns should be able to hold on to that very red state, Big Sky country, it brings us back to what we've been talking about all night. And here at Fox, we were among the first to point out what Republicans called the firewall states. It's Missouri, Virginia, and Tennessee, 3 contiguous states in the South that are so tight tonight. And right now, more than 90% of the vote has been counted in Virginia, and it's still far too close to call. In Missouri, they're just really getting started, and Jim Talent has moved out to a tiny little bit of a lead, but it's very, very early on the returns. And Tennessee, both campaigns, both parties down there, saying that they're going to have to wait, too. All the momentum for Bob Corker, the Democrats are arguing, still hasn't been completed. But if the Republicans can hang on to that 3-state firewall across the bottom, across the Old South there, they believe they'll be able to hold on, and that's where Democrats are trying to break it.
Okay, Carl, very interesting. Thanks very much. It is just after 10:07 in the East, and the national election picture is such now that I think Bill Kristol can sum it up for us, at least as regards the Senate. Bill?
Well, just as Carl was saying, even if Montana goes, just do this right, goes Democratic, which I think most people would have predicted based on the polls.
Yeah, certainly a few weeks ago.
Right. That's a +4 for the Democratic. Tennessee looks like Republicans are hanging in. Obviously, we only have 53% of the actual raw vote, but it looks like it's staying there. Arizona is predicted to stay there. They need to win Missouri and Virginia. And I'm really struck by Virginia. The early exit polls showed a disaster for George Allen in Virginia. The later exit polls are closer, but actually the final exit polls still showed Webb winning fairly comfortably. But the real vote, we're now at 90% of the raw vote, which is a lot of vote. And last I saw, Allen was still ahead by about 30,000. It's getting a little hard to make that up. We don't know what's out, what precincts are out. Maybe it's, inner city precincts in Richmond or something, and Webb's going to come back. But it looks to me like if you had asked a typical Republican which seat of these are they going to lose, I think many of them might have said, gee, Virginia looks rough. But it might be that George Allen saves Republicans the majority in the Senate.
Wow. Let's take a quick look out in Indiana. This is one of those battleground House races, and we predict that the incumbent Mike Sodrell, who was one of the endangered Republicans in Indiana, will lose now to his challenger Barron Hill. Barron Hill, if I'm not mistaken, is a former congressman whom Sodrell defeated in a previous election. So this was a rematch, and the results have been reversed. So that's a further confirmation of a trend we've seen in Indiana and elsewhere. Major Garrett joins me again. Major, your thoughts on this race?
Well, Britt, a couple of things. First of all, that is a rematch. When Barron Hill lost to Mike Sodrell last election in 2004, it was by less than 1,500 votes, and Democrats felt very confident that in a rematch in this anti-Bush, anti-Republican year, they'd have a chance. But I want to tell you, our viewers should pay attention to this race because I think it's going to be subject to legal challenge. It's very close, and I'm already reading from my notes here that in Monroe County, the largest county in that 9th district in Indiana, there is a dispute over some absentee ballots. The FBI has already been contacted, is investigating that. Republican lawyers have raised alarms about some absentee ballots found after all the ones were supposedly turned in. There's some disputes about ballots in that huge county, Monroe County. This will probably be one of many, Britt, if they're close, that will be subject to legal scrutiny and some legal review. Back to you.
Major, very interesting. Thanks very much. We're going to take a brief break. Back with more in a moment. Stay tuned.